I've been sitting on this for a very long time, and have waited until I was at a semi-safe or moderately safe place to say anything. I'm hopefully moving out on the 28th, and I feel like I can post this, and whether they see it or not, there's not much they can truly do at this point. It's kind of long, but this is a long story that took place over several years ago, so I feel like I've condensed it with enough detail to make somewhat sense. I've been watching my three younger siblings since I was 14, and we just moved to a different state. And at that point, the youngest kid was 2.5, now 6. Up until then, I never had a very good relationship with any of them. Barely hung out with them, stayed mostly at or with my grandmother. Didn't even have a good relationship with my parents, and was resentful of them because of my parents' and very obvious favoritism. It started small, just an hour or two, and then quickly devolved into watching them for hours on end, into the night when they made friends with neighbors and went out, to watching them nearly full time when the parents were home, just before the pandemic hit. I watched them with no pay, unless you count them feeding and housing, not giving me to an abuser as payment like they did. Until they started with $25 a week. No exceptions, and it did not matter how much I actually worked, and I never actually touched any cash. They would buy things for me, if they had the money on the side from their own spending. The pandemic made it very easy to guilt trip me into watching them all the time and sacrificing everything. There are several different stories I could tell, but some of the quick points are, quote, I let them pull me from school to do all virtual, despite having some apprehension. I let them pay me and then hold this pay over my head. I let them continue to pull me out of school for my senior year. I let them ruin my relationship with my girlfriend for a long while before I put my foot down and repaired it. And I let them take my opportunity to get a job/license and work for them for 60 hours a week worth of babysitting. These kids are not angels. Hell, not even part angel. They go unchecked and undisciplined. I'm the only one that they even semi-listen to. And that's only a 50-50 shot. They run around like banshees, hit and scream, and are just genuinely bad kids. They're constantly on a screen, and have been as long as I can remember, watching, quote, scary videos and murdery videos, and things that young children shouldn't be watching. They stay up as late as I do. I've had trouble sleeping literally since I was a baby, and I'm trying to help myself without becoming dependent on melatonin, and such I don't become immune. And sometimes they stay up even later. For reference, that can mean 4 to 6 a.m., and sometimes get knocks on my door asking for food and such. It's not just me who says these things. My grandmother, who watches them when we go back to our hometown. My family who sees them. My girlfriend's family who sees them act this way, their teachers, etc., also say this or that, or say it more politely. The youngest is the worst, going the most unchecked and ignored, and when she's bad, it's, quote, well, she has ADHD, so... No, that's not an excuse, not even a diagnosis. You just don't parent her, and don't want to help her. I've had ADD diagnosed but unmedicated because my mom refused to remedicate me after the last pills made it difficult to maintain weight and gave me facial tics. I understand that sometimes it's not fun or easy for people to be around me, but even I can say I don't think she has ADHD, or even if she does have it, I think she has a mom who doesn't discipline her and instead encourages bad behavior. It's ridiculous. The middle kid is becoming more mature at 9 years old, but still unchecked and doesn't listen. The oldest, who is now 12, is realizing his parents don't actually parent and is becoming resentful as the younger girls get favored because he's getting prepped to be the next me. I understand the whole older kids babysitting younger kids thing, but you cannot expect a 14-year-old who barely recognized her siblings to be able to cope well with that kind of childcare. Hell, I don't even really like children. And even as a kid, I don't really hang out with younger kids than me because I found them annoying. Ironic, I know, because I was probably just as annoying. Making me do this made me resent them even more, in all honesty. It was exhausting and made me a resentful person for a while. I still am very angry and have a lot of pent-up frustration that I'm working to try to get through. I don't think I've ever been capable of caring properly for these kids, in my honest opinion. And they should have either a real babysitter or after-school care. I've had several breakdowns and just am not mentally well enough for this job. And my concerns and valid points for these have been ignored. When we moved town, 23-minute drive between my house and my girlfriend's house for reference, they got very, very bold. My biological dad is dead, and because of that, my mother receives a survivor's check with stipulations as to where it can be spent. My entire family bashes her for refusing to use the money correctly and just abusing it. And it's an extremely sore and sensitive spot between us. Especially with all of the, quote, jokes that they use my check for themselves. And that money isn't really for me, but them. And how they quite literally refuse to let me stay in my hometown, where I was happier and healthier, because they meant they'd lose that check. They've openly admitted they were never going to let me know of its existence because they did not want me to know. I found out the only reason they can afford their house that we're in is because of this check. They depend on this despite having a second job and well-paying government jobs. You might say, well, the pandemic, but no. They've admitted if they just cut back on frivolous things, like that $1,000 armchair they bought in December, and my mom's purse collection, and all their other bullshit, they'd been doing okay on their own. They guilt-trip me by saying that if I don't stay, they'll lose the house and it'll be all my fault. Eventually, it all came to a head back in October. I put my foot down and demanded I get a job. I needed money for college and had nothing to show for my life and had no way to pay for college, not even a license to get there at this point. This ended in a huge blown-out fight where I did some things I regret. I called them names, kicked a recycling can over, and punched a wall. Got in my parents' faces when they did mine. Essentially stooped to their level, and I'm ashamed to admit, but I will own up to my mistake. And she trashed my room and told me she'd never let me leave, and as long as I was her kid, I had no say in anything, and my life was hers to control essentially. She went on a rampage, saying how she'd take away everyone who contacts me, and I knew she'd make everyone hate me and how she'd make it, so I couldn't physically leave because I was all alone and had no one. I'm extremely afraid of this. I'm afraid of people leaving me. I'm afraid of people not coming back, and she knew this and said it all. I snapped out of it at that point and realized I had a scared dog upstairs who'd be coming back to my bedroom with glass everywhere because my mom threw a box of 20 or so glass bottles on the floor that I collect, and realized I had a girlfriend I loved who I wanted in my life, school to attend that I couldn't if she were to take my laptop, and that I would still have to watch her kids to freaking eat and actually survive here. I immediately backpedaled and apologized, and went along with what she was saying. I was promised therapy, pills, help with the kids, whatever bullshit she spilled out, and I knew everything was a lie. I refused to watch them until we had an agreement, and then I was paid $32 a week flat. I'd be leaving Friday to Sunday for a real job in my old town with my girlfriend. So I, quote, lost Friday's money. Whatever. I'd be making way more at the new job. Supposed to be in cash, but that stopped about a month afterward, where it was put on a Cash App card, but only with whatever they could spare depending on my wants and their extra money that they did not spend. Since then, I've been threatened to be held at my house, so I'd be fired with the phone turned off because my job's policy is, if you don't show up to a scheduled shift with any kind of notice, well, then you're fired. They run a formal restaurant that's successful and can't risk liabilities like people who don't show up, which I understand. I've been avoiding a bank account because I don't want her to have access to my money. I'm looking for a car and I'm getting ready to make a DMV appointment this week for my birthday, along with a bank and savings account and a walker's license. They've been getting more and more aggressive with saying I'm not leaving, to the point it's mentioned at least once a day. At first, it was, you aren't leaving until you graduate, so we have someone to watch the kids. Then, it was that they needed my check to pay their mortgage, and would not get it unless I stayed. And now, it's that I'll stay into the beginning of the summer to help them with their time of need. They've threatened to put me in a psych ward, to have me arrested, to give my family members up for things they have asked them to do to guilt trip me, and to have my girlfriend's parents arrested for harboring me as a runaway after I'm 18. I'm not a nanny. I've been preventing and furthering my life, and I've been withheld from getting the necessary things to survive on my own. I owe nothing to them or their kids, and in self-preservation, have to let them be on their own and figure their own shit out. I don't want kids. I did not buy a house I couldn't afford and depend on a government check to help me along. I need to go to school to get the kind of job I want. I think the best opinion for this is a comment that I just found, but I do agree with the stance when you say, OP, you have to get up out of there. Sneak out in the middle of the house, sneak out in the middle of the night, whatever you have to do, just get out of there. Don't comply to them and don't break down. Here's the comment I found. Do not give them notice. You're just going to give them time to trap you in that house. Move your stuff out discreetly and just leave. Give them a courtesy text that you're not coming back. Maybe even contact the local police station and tell them your situation, so you're not reported missing or kidnapped. Cover your butt and just go. Abuse can escalate when you leave or not leave. They know this and will continue to make it worse if they have this information. Okay guys, there's an update for this. Drop your thoughts down below and let's check out the update. My dog and I are safely moved out and okay. A lot went down in the past 2 weeks and my mental health was not too great after leaving. So my update is a bit late as I did not want to just babble nonsense and overwhelm myself further. I do want to state before you read this post that I understand that some of my actions weren't necessarily the best choices, and I know some of my actions were influenced by guilt tripping and manipulation. I'm okay with my current situation or agreement as it's incredibly temporary, and I don't think there would have been a more peaceful resolution. A few days after posting my original EP story, I revealed to them I was leaving. I did this because they were already starting to poke around and ask questions, and I knew they were going to find out either way. I wanted to be a bit in control of the situation, and I did not want to risk getting caught off guard. I can say honestly, it was the best solution knowing what I know now and what happened after I told them. I attempted to talk to them calmly with my girlfriend and dog in the car just across the street, and me as the only one in the house. It was a safeguard in case anything got physically violent, because if it did, I would walk out and leave and 100% would tell the police I don't feel safe. if they continued to pursue me. This backfired a bit, as they were very, very upset and said things I just can't forgive them for, but I'd already anticipated the freakout. I was told that I would be getting cut off and cutting off all bridges to them, and if I ever had to ask them for help or come back, that I'd be doing every house chore they could think of. I'd have to quit my job to watch the kids 24/7, even on weekends. That my relationship with my girlfriend was abusive and unsafe and unhealthy, and I was manipulated by her to move in. That they didn't want me to anymore. That I was screwing them over, and it didn't matter if I was trying to better my life, because it did not benefit them. I would like to point out that they told me in the fight that they hoped I would not lose my job, because I wasn't leaving for the next 2 weeks, and that they'd look on me applying for new ones. I did not let out that I've already talked to my boss. I've anticipated and even heard much of this before, so I just kind of sat quietly and reiterated that I wasn't changing my mind on moving out. They still weren't happy, but I talked to my girlfriend in the car for a while afterward, and eventually sent her home after calming down. My mother had already contacted my grandmother, someone whose opinion means a lot to me, by the way, just to try and convince me to stay until at least the end of the school year. She had my grandmother beg me, and bug me really, until about a day before I left and try to guilt trip me into staying. My mother also used the fact that my grandfather has cancer. How are you going to use Grandpa? You're never going to see Poppy before he dies. I refused to stay, and it ended in a few days of quiet tension between all of us before we started talking again. I was then told I could actually leave for work, and that, quote, "She said that when she was mad. Why would you think about that would stand?" It resulted in me leaving for the weekend. My most important valuables have been moved out, stuff like my dead dad's hat, stuff from my baby box, some trinkets, etc. We fought for the remainder of the 2 weeks, going back and forth on compromises, and what I was going to do and how I was going to take care of myself. I will point out the big fights or talks, as they are important. After coming back from that weekend, I sat down with them per their request, just to talk about potential situations. They said they genuinely could not afford the house, or childcare, and showed me that no one was even responding to their ads, and that after-school services were all booked in our area. I said, fine, then let's talk about it, but I am not A, giving up any days I could potentially work at my job, B, not agreeing to anything at this point because I need time to think. The potential plan we came up with was I come home on Sundays. My stepdad would pick me up and my girlfriend would pick me up Wednesday to take me to work in the same fashion of how we do it on Fridays. I walked away from that conversation with both of us agreeing that I agreed to nothing we talked about. I then got texted later that night at about 1 a.m, asking if potentially 8 to 9 p.m. was good for a Sunday pickup. I tried to avoid the question and asked something else, but he was persistent, until I finally said, yeah, that could potentially work if we do that. Intentionally vague, not agreeing that it was a permanent solution. My girlfriend refused to drive me back and forth, which I agreed with as it's an hour's drive back and forth. And as they needed me and because they refused to help me get my own license when I wanted, they should be the ones to drive me. I came up with a solution of, well, maybe I could give them Wednesdays if I had them off. Otherwise, the other babysitter they managed to find for part-time work could do the Wednesdays I couldn't. They flipped again, saying I was going back on our agreement and I was lying and manipulative little shit, and that I wasn't being reasonable and it was again ducking them over. I reiterated I did not agree to anything. I never agreed to even stay in any capacity, and I was pissed they attempted to gaslight me into believing that I did. It ended in another argument where very much things were said again, but I just kind of ignored it. Stuck to my guns and they relented. I did not give them Wednesdays because I wasn't comfortable with it anymore. I couldn't trust them to get me to my job on Wednesday reliably, and I didn't really want to be there more than I had to, and their other babysitter agreed just to take Wednesday. It ended in an argument over Messenger while she was at work, where she essentially told me that when I worked next, I could pack my stuff and leave. She then texted my girlfriend and her parents a huge list of my, quote, problems, and how I'm just using them and waiting for my chance to duck them over too, including discussing my psychiatric hospital visits and past parental abuse. They said they dismissed it because they'd A, known me for 3 years, and at this point, and what my mom was saying wasn't lining up with what they saw, and B, they weren't going to take my mom's word when she was acting crazy and revealing things they weren't even sure if I was comfortable discussing outside of a therapist office. I'm incredibly grateful for them and have told them that if I ever do anything wrong, then I expect punishment, but that I never intentionally wrong them. I really do love them like my family and would protect them like they are. She came home and tried to say that me buying myself and my siblings pizza the other night was, quote, trying to get brownie points before screwing them over, and I was just being an ass. I had no ulterior motives with the pizza. I just wanted pizza and felt guilty ordering some and not sharing, because the kids also wanted pizza for the past 2 weeks, so I bought them some too. I was prepared to leave that night and had all my stuff packed, and sat as such, and she flipped her shit again. It resulted in a fight where she slandered my deceased father. I'm not sure if what she said was true, and I'm not really willing to find out. She name-called and said I would be crawling back, that she'd always loved me as her firstborn, but hated the person I was. Begged me for me to stay and help. It ended with both of us walking away unhappy until we talked about it later that night again. What it's come down to is this. I work Monday and Tuesday. They drive me to and from, meaning they pick me up Sunday and drop me back off Tuesday. My stepdad gets a work-from-home job in April after training through March, and then I no longer have to come over at all, and they'll leave me the F alone. They want nothing to do with my dog at all, even just to spite me. My mom doesn't like him and neither does my stepdad, so they said if I did not take him, they would dump him. I scheduled my permit test wrong and it got rescheduled for the 16th. But good news is, I've studied enough that I'm 100% sure I'll pass. And my girlfriend's mom said to not pay for a walker's license because it's a very short wait, and after I get the permit, I can get the bank account and such. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my social security check, and I'm in contact with the office and school and trying to figure out how to change the stuff. My mom wants half of it and she'll be quiet if she gets it. So I'm debating just sacrificing that half for the sake of peace of mind and sanity, since I do have a steady job and plan on picking another up after April. I'm sorry, all this isn't what people wanted, but I've seen what they do to people to get revenge if you duck them over. The way she talked to me during the last fight tells me she no longer sees me as her kid, in any capacity, just somebody she'll duck over if I don't at least agree to the bare minimum like I did. But after April, I'm no longer useful and I'll get forgotten, like everyone else, which is why I'm even agreeing to this in the first place. Okay, so I'm glad OP decided to get the heck out of that situation. However, the SS check that the parents are relying on should be solely going to OP. I don't think she should give in to that, and she should continue to fight to keep that money. That's my opinion, but let's read one comment from someone from the original thread. It states, "I'm glad you're getting yourself out, and thank you for the update. But, OP, do not give your parents a single cent of your check or any paycheck. That money is for you to build your own life. They're adults who need to make their own financial decisions. You are not hurting your family by keeping your rightful owned money to yourself." Do you guys agree with that statement, or do you think for some reason her family's entitled to some part of her money? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Our next story that we're going to look at is an interesting one. It's titled, "I'm 33 weeks pregnant and my mother-in-law finally asks who's going to be in the room. She hates the answer." Here we go, guys. Next story is upon us. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Here we go. At 2 in the morning, I received the following text from her. She's at a casino, even though still jobless, so I would say there's a 90% chance she's drunk. Quote, "So, I've been thinking about asking you this for a while, and I finally mustered up the courage to ask, so here it is. Who do you have in the delivery room with you besides your fiancé to help you and welcome your unborn son into this world?" I responded with the following. Just my fiancé and my son's godmother will be in the waiting room with my son's godfather, in case he needs a break and someone to vent to or needs to switch out for any reason. But since I'm scheduled for an induction and C-section, only one person can come back. As long as everything goes smoothly, people can meet him over FaceTime while at the hospital. I'm not sure how many visitors they allow, but I know they said I can have one person in the room while I'm giving birth, and another outside ready to switch in case needed. Since I am high risk for labor failure, they want to keep the number of people there to an absolute minimum. That includes likely having the same nurses, or Dr. Jet being an on-call to deliver Easton whenever day I go into labor. So I'm most comfortable. I asked if my son's godfather could sit in the waiting room, in case fiancé got too overwhelmed and needed a few, and they said that's fine. He just can't be in the room. Me and fiancé have talked about it extensively, and rather not have visitors in the actual hospital room, unless they say he has to stay more than 24 hours. Then, at the hospital's discretion, immediate family can start visiting. They don't expect more than a 24-hour stay for him, since he's perfectly healthy. It's me they're particularly worried about. I'm worried about them not letting him stay with me in the hospital, and having to leave my fiancé all alone, but we haven't really gotten that far in discussion because he refuses to talk about them separating us as a family. If I'm the only one in the hospital for more than 24 hours, at the hospital's discretion, immediately family is welcomed. I would just prefer one at a time, and nobody under 13 comes to the hospital so I can rest. Everyone will get the text when it's okay to come see me. Wherever we are, we probably will be driving him to see people, as we'll need time to adjust to him being in the house. And we're worried about disturbances and that. She responds with this. "So, can you swap out the godfather for me?" I would be honored to be fiancé's tag partner if needed, and I wanted to be there anyways. Through the entire process, like I wanted to take you guys there and be on property the entire time for any and every reason necessary. I want to help in every single way I can, as well as be as close as possible to my little grandson when he makes his grand entrance. Is there any reason you did not want me to see your plan B? I didn't know how to respond to this while keeping the peace, especially with my fiancé asleep. I want to add, I was living with her and her family when I first got pregnant, because my mom died very suddenly last year. When she found out I was pregnant, she gave me 2 days to get out of her house and told me that she would pay for an abortion. I'm pro-choice, but that's not what I wanted. Every time I mention that we got pregnant shortly after miscarrying, she says this: "Oh my god, I wanted to kill you guys." She loves her grandson, I don't doubt that. She's never been involved in the beginning of life with any of her grandkids, so I'm not sure if she realizes she's overstepping. But as a parent herself, I would think she would know. How do I approach this? So the first thing I notice about this story, I thought mother-in-law was getting excessive information that she did not need, and basically it was ammunition she was using against OP. I would inform the hospital, say, "Hey, this is the situation. I don't want this person here. She might barge in anyways, so let them know so you have a peaceful pregnancy." Let's read a comment before we hop into the next story. And remember guys, if you've had any similar stories like this, drop them down below and who knows, maybe I'll feature it on the channel. I love reading your opinions, stories, and thoughts. Here's the comment. "Way too much info going on. Stop telling mother-in-law. She's getting way too much ammo." My thoughts exactly. Second, let the hospital know there might be an unwelcome visitor. You need your little army around you right now, making sure the Wicked Witch of the West doesn't get her flying moonies airborne. I love that. Okay guys, here comes the final story of the day. Let's get right to it. Hey y'all, I'm currently feeling like the living dead and stuck in bed. So I've decided to share this ongoing tale with you all. I'll be sure to post update. My partner, 30 male, and I, 25 female, started our relationship 5 years ago. When we met, I found out he shared a mortgage with mother-in-law because her ex left so she could not hold the mortgage. Boyfriend had a good job and decided to step up. We had not met yet and he was single and living there, so he did not think much of it, and that was his mother. He's a wonderful son and person. I moved in with him after 7 months. I know that's pretty soon, but there were some unforeseen events that led me to just stay. And that's when I started to realize there was something really off about mother-in-law. To give a visual of the house, it's a 2-story house with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms upstairs, and 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom downstairs. When I moved in, we lived in his bedroom upstairs. All downstairs was absolutely filled to the ceiling with junk and boxes. Almost like an episode of Hoarders. Completely unlivable. There also is a laundry room down there, and that's when we all did our laundry. We were finally able to convince mother-in-law to get her shit out of the way so we can move downstairs and have a bit more privacy. There's a door leading into the living area up the downstairs, and she would use that to get to the laundry. We spent most of our time in our living area, and got tired of her constantly coming through it. So I tried to talk and make a compromise. There was 2 other ways to get to the laundry room. One way is down the outside stairs to the laundry room door, and the other is through the garage and through the hall. I went and bought some curtains to set up on either side of the door, so she had her own little special hallway. She kept coming through after agreeing to use the other way. One day, we replaced the doorknob with a knob with a lock that locked from the inside. We'd locked up and left the house for a few hours. When we got back, we found out she's taken a butter knife and forced open the lock. Something that could have easily been avoided. When we confronted her, she got on the floor and cried, and my boyfriend went over to comfort her. That's when I realized that she manipulates him. I only asked why she did it, and she broke down with crocodile tears. Eventually, I convinced boyfriend to get away and we moved into an apartment in town. It was bliss. I think from there, he started to gain a lot more confidence and stopped talking to mother-in-law as much. This was all 4 years ago. After we moved out, mother-in-law decided to spend a bunch of money and renovate the downstairs and make the house into a duplex type situation with her living in the bottom. It's separate now and she's invading no one's space. She charges a tenant $2,200 to live upstairs, which pays almost all her mortgage and her bills. Boyfriend is still on the title and the mortgage of the house. When he was there, he was paying everything, including her phone bill. Anything to add, mother-in-law doesn't work. So, fast forward to now. I'm 2 months pregnant with boyfriend's baby. We're starting a family and boyfriend is asked to move into the upstairs so we can have a bigger home to raise our baby. She says no. We ask her to take his name off. Nope. She refuses to let him live in the house. She won't buy him out. She won't take his name off because that would mean she can't keep the house. She cannot keep the house without boyfriend. Her reasoning is that she wants to save for her retirement, and she needs the $4,000 a month she makes from the tenant. Alimony also, and disability from the government, and also some under-the-table work, while we're currently grasping at straws. My boyfriend has finally realized that his mother doesn't give any shit about him or his child. And now we're going to take her to court. The house is worth almost $700,000, and we're going to force a sale for half. Basically, she's proved time and time again that she's selfish. A greedy woman who takes advantage of her son. Her other son does not talk to her or see her even on holidays. We understand why now. I'm honestly just still in shock at the fact that everything he's done for her, she won't do the same. Also, she has so much money. I'm 14 and male, and I've been wanting to share this story for a long time. It's a long story, so please be patient. I know it might sound like a lie, but believe me, I wanted it to be more than anything. This has ruined my family, and I'm not allowed to talk because my parents want to forget what they did. So, just be safe. I'm using my friend's brother's account to be extra safe. Well, my parents had lost their partners. My father separated from my older sister Lucy's mother, currently 25 years old. My mother lost her ex-husband in a car accident, and had to care for my brother who's currently 23 years of age. And that turned them into single parents with custody of their children. The two met on the beach, and after they talked and exchanged their numbers, they started dating, and 2 years later they got married. Well, let's stop rambling and let's get to the story. It all started when I was 8 years old, and my brothers were 17 and 19. My brother was in the third year of high school, and my sister was working at a grocery store near our house. While my parents and my sister worked, I stayed with Kirby. It'll seem strange, but the best moments of my life were with Kirby. I know that a lot of older brothers don't get along with younger brothers, but that wasn't the case. I loved it with Kirby, and I loved Kirby with all his heart, and I know that he loved me too. He always took care of me. He played and studied with me, and sometimes he took the scoldings for me. Then, one day, everyone was leaving school waiting for Kirby in front of my school, because our schools were close together, so he always came to pick me up, but this time it was different. He didn't come. I stayed until 4 p.m. when my sister came to pick me up. I asked about my brother, but she didn't say a word. She just avoided the conversation, and when we got home, I was surprised by the sound of things breaking in the house, and the frightening screams of my parents. When we entered the home, the scene could not be worse. Kirby was falling to the floor as my father kicked him and threw dishes at him, and my mother screamed horrible curses at Kirby. I was so scared, and I didn't leave my sister's side, who took me upstairs and told me not to leave the room. Do not leave the room until further notice. So, I stayed there listening and crying, and I've never seen my family like that, and I can say now that I'm still afraid of them no matter how old I am. Then all of a sudden I can hear a siren, and when I get to the window I see there's 2 vehicles, and many policemen get out from there and soon enter the house. A little later I hear more screams and a voice of arrest, and I see my father and mother. They are being taken by force by the police to the vehicle. My parents screamed horrible words at my brother, saying he was a miserable worm who deserved to be hurt, and my mother was also agreeing. After they were put in the car, I went downstairs, and man, that was scary. Lucy was crying on the floor with Kirby in his arms. He was completely bloodied and full of bruises from head to toe. After that scene, I just remembered that everything was an absolute blur. I just remembered being inside an ambulance and the hospital. It was more like a dream, but my sister disagrees and says no, it was more like a nightmare. It was the worst day of my life, truly. About 3 days later, my parents were still in jail for assault and attempted murder. So my sister took a few days off to look after me. I finally plucked up the courage and asked my sister what had happened. Lucy, being the first person to ever treat me like an adult, told me the truth. Our brother Kirby had been accused of sexual assault by a girl in high school. The girl went to the screaming and bruised principal saying that Kirby had abused her, and our parents and the girl's parents were called to the school and even the police were involved. Although Kirby's explaining to our parents that he did not do that, they wouldn't listen, and they took the girl's side. So when the police said they would investigate and run some tests, Kirby and the girl were able to go home, and then what happened happened. Now, my brother was hospitalized with the risk of having major physical problems because the beating did a lot to damage to his body. The next day, the police called my sister to the police station, and she had to take me with her, but what they revealed to us was absolutely terrifying to say the least. Apparently it's Karen, the girl who made the report, the accusation at least. And just note, Karen, if you're reading this, know that you're the most despicable person I know, and I hope you burn for eternity. You destroyed our lives. Well, seems like she's made a false report. It was a false report because she and Kirby hated each other at school, and after another fight between the two, she went to the bathroom and hurt herself and planned to say that he hit her. But then the pretty one decided to escalate it to abuse, sexually, thinking that she could expel my brother from school, but that stupid witch made a mistake. She told her friends during a video call and laughed about the situation. What she didn't count on was that everybody would turn against her. Except her best friend, who really suffered sexual abuse when she was little and no one believed her until recently. Karen's former best friend went to the police station and told the police everything, and also managed to record a little of the conversation after the little confession. The police questioned Karen for fear of being arrested. She confessed everything. She sung like a canary. My sister was more mad than I've ever seen her. She wanted to rip Karen's head off at the moment, but the police calmed her down, saying that Karen's parents would have to pay a fine for the false accusation and the slander. My sister thought it was good, but not enough, and when we got back home, we were home as soon as my sister saw them, she exploded. Said everything that happened at the police station while screaming, and they listened in silence, getting more and more surprised with each sentence. By the time my sister was done, my mom was in full-fledged tears, and mine was still paralyzed. And then he did the worst thing to that one. He asked this, "Are you sure about this?" Man, that was the worst choice of words I've ever heard. Lucy gave a long speech about how they were bad parents to believe that situation without any sort of proof whatsoever. And my dad tried to justify that the girl's words were worth a lot, but my sister was not having it by saying that without evidence her words were worthless. I know that unfortunately many people abused are called liars when not proven, but this case is different. Karen truly lied and deceived everyone for a petty reason. I hope you understand. My father was defeated after that, and for several days the house was absolutely silent. All I heard was crickets. It wasn't the same without Kirby. He was the soul of the house. He was good and kind to almost everybody. He always brought joy to us. To this day, I don't know how my parents fell so easily on Karen's lips. I hate them for that, and I'll never forgive them for what they've done. After a long time, Kirby had woken up, but only to see his poor condition. For you to have an idea, his jaw was broken. He lost 60% of vision in one eye. His arm and forearm were absolutely shattered. His ribs badly damaged, and he narrowly missed puncturing his lung. His leg was so badly damaged that he'll never walk properly again without help. And it's presented pro-traumatic stress, depression, and anxiety. My brother was never the same, to say it simply. He still feels severe pain and needs to take a lot of controlled medication. He did not speak for weeks, and when he removed the device that put his jaw in place, it didn't change much. He only spoke when we asked a question. He didn't speak when he was hungry, and many times he started crying out of nowhere, and I think it was due to the trauma. I wanted to hug him, but his wounds were so severe that it was indeed risky. Many times my parents tried to visit my brother. My mother begged and my father wanted to force us to take them, but my sister forbade it, because she knew that the last thing my brother wanted was to see them. And she told them that, but it wasn't enough. One day, my mother couldn't visit him because of work, and my parents saw that as a good opportunity to go himself. They went in secret. I think in their mind it would be like this, and I quote, "Let's visit our son, ask apologies. He's going to accept. We'll be fine, and we'll be one big happy family again." Yeah, their serious mistake, and as soon as they entered the room, my brother gave the loudest scream I've ever heard from him. Soon the doctors and nurses entered the room to try to calm my brother, and he said to them, Get them out of here. They're murderers. They've come to kill me. Please get them out of here." And soon after, he started crying and passed out due to stress. Of course, then my parents were expelled and forbidden to see Kirby. That is, only my sister and I were allowed to see him. My mother cried all night while my father kept putting the blame on our brother, saying that he is just exaggerating. After many more months of recovery, both physically and mentally, Kirby was placed from the hospital. My parents had the audacity to ask him to come home. However, they got this response: "I wouldn't come back to this house, even if it were the last place on earth. From now on, I am also motherless. I hope you both pay for everything you did to me." My brother moved in with his paternal grandparents, who didn't know anything until the moment and took a protective measure against our parents. He said that my sister and I were welcome to come and visit whenever I wanted, and we did if I am sure I spent more time with him than at home with our parents. But the last straw comes now, when we find out a family party that my father had lied to our whole family about, saying that our brother dropped out of school to live in the world of drugs, and that he left home, taking his things and money that we were saving for my college. The money wasn't even earned by them. It's Kirby and Lucy who are raising money for my college, by the way. And Kirby has worked a lot of odd jobs, and now he's working and saving money because, according to him, I deserve a better future. My sister and I got so mad. We told the whole family the truth, and, well, they were incredulous and very angry with our father and mother, the only ones who stood by my paternal grandparents, who said that it was the human to her, and that my parents did nothing wrong and that they were just ashamed of what they did, but no one would listen, and they abandoned my parents to the wind and went after Kirby to strictly apologize. Here's a little fun fact. Kirby called me the next day asking why people he hadn't spoken to in months come to apologize to him, and he didn't know why. A year after the incident, Karen's parents showed up at our door, asked if Kirby was home, and when we said no, they apologized for what happened and left. But later I found out that what they wanted was to pay his own severance to Kirby, giving him all the money that was for college and Karen's car. My brother said thanks, but I don't forgive Karen, and said he'll never forgive her, and if she ever shows up in front of him, he'll say hello, truths in her face. Her parents accepted this and left. Currently, my brother is much better, but he's not cured. He has many nightmares of that day, which lead to anxiety attacks, and it's necessary for someone to go to calm him down. I want to be there so much to help my brother, so much for me to get rid of that toxic environment we call home. So I thought I would move in with Kirby. First, I spoke to my brother. He was hesitant at first, but accepted and spoke to his grandparents, who agreed. I spoke to Lucy, and she thought it was an absolute great idea. But when I spoke to my parents, it was a completely different story. My mother burst into tears and my father was desperate, saying that everyone had already abandoned them and now this youngest one too. I got irritated and told them that I've already abandoned him that darn afternoon, and that he would never have me back again. My father, a man in his 50s, always said that crying was for sissies. I watched him start crying like a baby, saying that he'd already lost everything and that he didn't want to lose me too. I couldn't stand that situation and I left the house and I came to a friend's house to vent. My friend suddenly scolded me, saying that I should not abandon my parents like that since his older brother, who owns this account, Steve, said he didn't know anything and told him to shut up. Steve said that his brother was someone with a weak mind and that I should see more people's opinions. Well, he introduced me to here and asked me to ask this question to you beautiful people. What do I do, guys? What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So today's story is an absolute bombshell. There's 2 more parts to this story, and things get a heck of a lot crazier. The first opening sentence for the next update is this. Well, guys, a lot's happened since I did the last one. If you're new to the channel, make sure you click that subscribe button so you never miss another story like this one. And here is your first update. Part 2. I ended up having to run away from the home because my parents forbid me from leaving the house. So I waited. I waited for them to leave the house together because they're going shopping and they never took me along because they think I'm a kid and I'm going to be asking that they buy me a bunch of junk. But I didn't expect it. It's okay, my parents made me go with them. That was a big crap. So I thought I would just take basics and put them inside a backpack and someone take some snacks to cover it up. As soon as we got to the market, I asked to go to the bathroom. Luckily, they were obsessed about how the price of food had gone up, that my dad just told me to go and come back soon. Plot twist. I did not come back. I ran away from the market as quick as my feet would let me go, and took the bus that came closest to Kirby's grandparents' house, and when I got it there, it was Kirby's grandmother who received her, and told me to be at ease, while Kirby and her grandfather didn't come home. When they arrived, I told everyone that it's fallen upon here, and my brother's reaction was not what I expected. He said that he was very irresponsible for running away. And it was dangerous because something could have happened to me. It may even seem to come in, but I like it when he scolds me. It shows that he cares about me, unlike our parents. I could disappear for 3 days and they wouldn't even know or miss me. That already happened, by the way, and they just got mad when they found out I had a brother. I accepted the scolding in a good way and asked if I could stay. He said this. You will come back here even if I send you back to their house, so you just better stay. I was very happy and hugged him. His grandparents were also very happy with my brother's decision, but my joy dissipated quickly when he said that I would have to notify my parents. I protested as much as I knew how to and said that they would come for me. But my brother said, quote, but they're responsible for you, and if you don't tell them, then they can call the police. Say that I kidnapped you and that I'm holding you hostage. So, with that new information, I called my mother. She barely answered and started screaming at me, asking me where the heck I was. When I said where I was, they got even more mad. Started screaming in some sort of alien language in a way that everyone around me could hear through the phone. I could have stood there listening to them yell at me, but I hung up when I realized that Kirby was uncomfortable with the yelling. After the aggression, he became sensitive to screaming, and he cursed my parents for what they did to him. I got angry and said that they could come and take me by force, but my brother said that they are aggressive, but not idiots. But we all know they are. And already he has a protective measure against which, if they approach, they're just going to call the police. Oh, how wrong he was. An hour and a half later, they were banging on the front door, cursing and screaming my brother for generations to come. Kirby's grandparents told them to leave, otherwise they will call the police. This made them even more mad, and they went back to banging on the door. If I wanted to go there and tell them to go away, but Kirby needed me. I needed to hold him, because, well, he wanted to go there. It shows those two in the face, and he has a lot of anger built up towards them. He even said once that he wanted to hurt them slowly and painfully. I even agree with that, but I don't think he should get his hands dirty for me. Then they broke into the door and started to destroy the house in search of me. They started to destroy the house. At that moment, I decided to go down to send them away. I was asking my brother to calm down so that I could go down there and leave them. I just want him to be safe here. Then my mother gave a scream, the loudest I'd ever heard from her, and my father had shut up. After convincing my brother to stay in the room, I went downstairs and the scene could not be more depressing. My father was slumped and shaking on the floor while my mom was over him crying and calling to him in vain. I looked at Kirby's grandparents and I saw that the grandfather was holding a taser. I think we all know what happened, right? When my mother saw me, she started screaming, "You see what they did to your father? Call the police. They must be arrested." Well, I replied, saying that if I called the police, the one who were going to be arrested would be her for breaking the rules of the protective measure, which she ignored and continued to scream for us to call the ambulance for her husband. We ignored her and we said that as soon as my father recovered, they were to leave and never come back. When my father was returning to his normal self, he was strangely silent. He was totally beaten and defeated. When suddenly my brother had come down and my mother immediately attacked him, which gave me this beautiful dialogue, my mother against my angry brother. She starts blaming him for everything, saying that he was the reason that all our relatives have abandoned her, that her children were turning their backs. That's when she starts to victimize herself, saying that it was just an innocent woman who will go to church every Sunday and that I was a good person who did not deserve to go through this. I don't know what she meant by that. No one would feel sorry for her just because of that. Kirby was silent throughout her skinny crisis, but then she crossed the line. She said that he was supposed to apologize to them for destroying their lives and telling everyone in the family that you have to forgive them. That was the absolute limit for old Kirby. Kirby, very angry, slapped so hard in the face, she fell to the ground. My mother starts screaming again, but Kirby told her to shut the duck up, or he's going to break her teeth on the base of the cane. He screamed a lot and all the things he'd held back all these years, about how miserable people they were, and how they dug their own graves, and how they didn't deserve to have anyone around them, and when they die, he's going to make a point to pee on top of their coffin. My mom starts to get even more angry and got up to hit Kirby, but I pushed her against the wall and she starts yelling at me too, saying I would go to heck for abandoning her, calling me a disgusting gay guy who would go to heck. Curiosity's sake, I'm bisexual, and I made the mistake of telling my parents. Surprisingly, my father was okay with it, and my mother was just mad, saying that we're all gonna go to heck and forbid me from being bisexual. She even introduced me to her daughter's friend at church. It's disgusting and makes the girls uncomfortable. The funny thing was that when I told it to my brother, he just said this, "So you give me a nephew, let's be cool." My brother started to send them away and that they should pay for the damages that they did to his house. Otherwise, that we're just going to file a complaint. My mother starts laughing at this point, saying that I wouldn't have the courage to report my own mother. I said that what I have most is courage, and that I would have the absolute satisfaction of seeing her arrested again. So she made a bunch of excuses, saying that we didn't have proof. But my brother refused her, saying that we were very much full of proof, and we have it right here and there. Because besides from fingerprints, cameras, he had video evidence of what all happened. It took a little longer before she accepted her defeat, and soon they left, but my brother wanted to leave the icing on the cake. When my mother was getting in the car, Kirby shouted out this. "Hey, I wish you could just disappear in my father's place." And in response, she gave the middle finger and got in the car screaming, which made my brother laugh and, that victory laugh after a long game of his favorite little game. Yeah, one of those laughs. Soon after, our sister called us saying that her mother had called her saying that she was attacked by our brother and that she was supposed to bring me back home to fix me. My sister said she was very proud of me for standing up for them and that Kirby was supposed to have a broken the cane over their head. Now I'm living with my brother as I've always wanted, and it's been wonderful. He wants my custody at all costs and is threatening my parents to give in to it, for good or bad. My mother said she would not leave me with an abuser. I think she thinks the fact that I'm bisexual is because I was abused by my brother. How ridiculous is that? I think now it's just a case of wanting her to give in. I think everything will go on track for now because I had the conversation with my brother before he went to sleep. He was wondering what it would be like if his father was alive, and I replied that maybe his life would be a little better. But he replied, maybe not. If he hadn't died, maybe I wouldn't have suffered the aggression, but then I wouldn't have my two angels in my life. And he gave me a kiss on the forehead. I must admit that was sweet. I hugged him. I love him so much, and I know that he'll protect each other at all costs. Well, thank you again to everyone who supported me. I hope that no one has to suffer what we suffered, and for those who think that our story's false, believe me, I want it to be. I wanted us to be a good family that welcomes and protects itself regardless of the situation, but no. This can only happen in my dreams. See you guys. Maybe I'll update with the results of the process. So, I'll see you then. I'm 24 female, and to be honest with you, I'm struggling with my parents, and it seems to always get worse rather than better. I feel like I'm constantly bashing my head against the wall when I try to talk to them, and our relationship is on the verge of disintegrating completely. Everything I do is wrong, and I feel as though I'm constantly fighting for approval from them, and that's how it may have been my whole life. My fiancé Max, he tells me I need to cut them out, directly out of my life before they break me down. But no matter what, I still want a relationship with my mom and dad. However, the way things are going now, I'm not sure I can hold this together. I wish I could say this is a new problem, but it's something that I've lived with since I was a child, and I just hoped over and over that they would mellow and let me live the life I want. I guess I should give you some background as the problem I'm facing at the moment will not make much sense without context of the things that's happened over my lifetime. My mom, Anna, is an extremely religious woman, and my dad, Michael, is a deacon at our church, and so we were raised to have faith and attend faith school. As I grew up, I was not sure where I was in terms of faith, but I was not as religious as my parents or my sister, Naomi, who is also the family's golden child and 3 years older than me. She's done everything right in the eyes of my parents. Well, mainly my mom. She's the most judgmental person, to be honest. For my part, I was sure from an early age that I wanted to go to university, as I had my heart set on being a veterinary surgeon. And that was my main focus. I also wanted to live my life and not be tied down by the things my mom thought a good girl should do. Anyways, I worked hard at school and I was accepted into the university that I was aiming for, and I'm loving every minute of my degree. I specialized in large animal care as I love horses and farm animals, and well, I got a job with a firm that works with local farms and horse yards that are paying for my education on the understanding I will work for them when I'm qualified. It's hard, dirty work, but I love every minute of it. The thing is that no, it's not ladylike, which my mom hates. At university, I met Max, and we were friends for a year before we even thought about dating. And well, we've been together since my second year at uni. He has finished his degree as it was shorter than mine and works for a local tech firm as a junior. One of the benefits of my work university combined life is that they provide an apartment with a car, as I'm on call for all emergencies that come up, and are also at the staff. Max moved in with me when he finished his education, as it made sense at the time. We had already said that we planned to get married one day, as we knew we were meant for each other. This was where the problems with my parents started in terms of my relationship with Max. You see, if I was going to be a good daughter like Naomi, I would have dated Max, got engaged, and then got married without living together first, or having any intimate contact of any kind. I failed on most of those requirements, as I believe you only get to know a person once you live together, and get to know each other other than on an intimate level. Naomi met her husband at church, dated, and got married within a year of meeting, and then had 2 children. She stays at home and keeps the house nice and looks after the kids. Now, please don't think I'm saying being a stay-at-home mom is a bad thing. It's just simply not for me. Naomi had a big church wedding, and it was beautiful in its own way, but again, it's not for me. My parents don't accept anything other than the marriage between men and women, and my Aunt Lizzie is a civil partnership with her partner of 20 years, Emma. And my mom's not talked to her sister since she came out. I'm close to my aunt, as my grandmother Hetty always made sure that we had contact with Lizzie as we were growing up. My grandmother is an amazing woman. She's 84 years of age, and she's always a woman of faith. But she's nothing like my parents and thinks that people should be allowed to love whoever or whomever they want, and that other people should mind their own darn business. I've always been close to my grandmother. I want to be like her when I'm an old woman, feisty and full of life. Anyways, as you can see, my family's not exactly a model family in terms of support and love. I do try my best not to upset my parents because no matter what, I do love them even when they're driving me insane. I hope that gives you an idea of what my parents are like and why I'm having some worries about the next stage of my life. Max proposed to me and I said yes. I was not expecting it at all because even though we had talked about marriage, I thought that we would wait until we were both in a more stable financial position, as I'm still not fully qualified, and Max is a junior in his firm. Max said that he thought about the waiting part, but to him, he didn't care if we were well off or not. He loved me and wanted to commit his life to me forever. I cried when he said that, as though the thought of someone loving me that much was definitely overwhelming. We've not told my parents yet, but I've told my aunt and grandmother. They were both extremely happy for us, but agreed to keep it between us until I got the courage to tell my parents. I don't think that my parents will be against the marriage, although they would probably suggest that we wait a while, as we're not in a stable financial position, and I do agree. The problem they will have is that I don't want a big church wedding. It's not me at all, and I feel that getting married in a church would be wrong, as neither Max or I fully believe in God like my parents do, and would prefer to get married in a venue that represents who we are. My ideal wedding would be at a large horse farm, where I do a lot of work as they hire their beautiful house and grounds out for the wedding. When I told my grandmother that, she laughed and said, "Your mother would probably faint if you ever told her that." This is the issue where I feel that outsiders may judge me a little. You see, as I said, Max and I don't have the money to pay for a wedding, and I'm relying on the wedding fund that my parents have put aside for me. My entire life, my mom's gone on and on about this fund, and how we are grown up and commit our lives to the man who loves us and protects us. The fund will pay for a beautiful wedding, a beautiful honeymoon, and a cash gift to start us off in a married life. However, as with all things in life, there are conditions to the release of the funds, and I have to sign a contract when I was about 11 years old, saying that I agreed to the terms, and I would ask at that point, who the heck makes their children sign a contract at 11 years old, let alone ever? All that aside, To get access to my wedding fund, I had to agree that I would get married in my dad's church, attend marriage preparation classes, stay pure, and live a good Christian lifestyle. Well, I assume I don't have to lay out in writing while I'll have a problem arguing that I honored that contract. My grandmother did say that she was sure that my parents would overlook some of the requirements, as if they did not think they would have to admit to their equally religious friends that they've raised a child who had strayed away, and that would cause them to lose faith. The point they will not let go is, though, the church wedding, and that's not a compromise I'm willing to make. I'm going to have a meal with my parents and sister this evening. I'm going to tell them that I am getting married, and that I don't want a church wedding. I'm expecting that they'll give me an extremely hard time about the subject, and Max has refused to come because he's very outspoken, and he would probably say something he regretted. He thinks I should just cut my losses and tell my parents that if they do not support us, then we will not need to cut our contact, it will happen, and then we'll find a way to pay for the wedding ourselves. I don't want to do that. My whole life I've been told they will pay for the wedding, and I want to have the same as Naomi did. But without the church. Am I being selfish to think that's right? Should I be waiting until I can pay for the wedding myself? I don't know. Anyways, let me know what you think and what you would do in the comment section below. I may not listen, but I thought it would be interesting to see what people look like from an outside thought. Update number 1. I have to say that the range of opinions on this has been incredible. To those of you who had suggestions, thank you. To those who called me a money grabber and an entitled brat, well, you know where you can shove those opinions. Regardless of everything, as I always do, I will be doing this my own way. I met my parents last night, and it started off on a bad foot, and went steadily downhill from the first moment I even arrived. When I walked in, my dad asked where Max was, and I said that he had not been able to come, but he sends his regards. My mom scowled and said that they only asked for us to come home once a month for a meal with the family, and if Max could not be bothered to do that, he was really the right man for me or no. He obviously did not take his responsibility seriously, and my mom's never liked Max, so she's always looking for a way to put him down. I did not raise to her baiting, and I was grateful to see my grandmother was already there, so I would at least have some sort of support. When I made my announcement, Naomi and her family were there, and she was gushing about some mundane thing that she had done that week, and managed to get her own little dig in about my appearance before I even took my coat off. I had come from work, so I had an old pair of jeans, a checked shirt, and work boots. She said, as an aside to her husband in a stage whisper, that wasn't he glad that she was much more feminine than I was, and did not wear men's clothing. I said that waddling around in a cow muck and a dress and sandals was not really a good look. But then what would she know, as she had not worked a day in her life? She sulked for the rest of the night, and her husband sat glaring at me as if I was the devil for what I said. My grandmother whispered to me to behave myself, and I really tried. But I find my family absolutely infuriating, and I'm just tired of defending how I live my life. We settled into an uneasy conversation, where I mainly listened, as it was less dangerous than trying to take part. Also, I had nothing in common with my mom or my sister. I chatted with my grandma for most of the parts. After we ate the main meal, my grandmother kicked me under the table. I mean, she really is a bad influence on me. And I took a deep break, and I told my parents that Max had proposed. And I said yes. To my surprise, my mom was extremely happy and was gushing about how amazing it was. That wasn't what I expected at all until she starts going on about how finally I would not be living in sin, and I would be a respectable married woman who she could talk about to her friends. Well, that came as a shock that she did not talk about me with her friends anyways. I assumed she would at least be proud of some of my achievements. I listened to her as she babbled on and told my dad about how happy she was, and I let her because I knew that once I told her where I wanted my wedding, whoa, that happiness would disappear. The first sign that my dad was not happy came next, as he raised his eyebrow in the way he used to when we were children, and we did something that made him annoyed and asked why Max had not approached him to ask for his permission to marry his own daughter. I opened and closed my mouth like a goldfish, because I was not sure how to answer that without offending him. But my grandmother beat me to it, saying, "For goodness sake, Michael, it's the 21st century. You know you don't own your daughter, right? She's not an object." Well, I smiled. Thank you, looking at my grandma, while it's Naomi's husband had to say, "Oh, well, Hetty, I'm pleased to say I did things the correct way." My grandma muttered, "Of course you did," underneath her breath, but mainly ignored him. She was never a fan of Naomi's husband, and neither am I, which is why he's not getting named in this. I had a feeling that I could not make things worse, and so I said that Max and I did not want to have a big church wedding, as it was not as though we went to church, and it felt wrong to pretend that we did. That is when things went to hell. My mom cried, my dad shouted about how if there's no church wedding, then there will be no wedding at all, and my sister sat and smugly smirked at her husband. It's made me extremely clear to me that unless I agreed to marry at the church, I would get no financial support from my parents, and they would not attend whatever, quote, fake wedding I organized. You see, to my parents, unless you get married in a church, your marriage is not legitimate and you may as well be living in sin. Without the church, they would not accept it that I was a married woman and would consider any children I have to be illegitimate. I hate to admit this, but I beg them to listen to me and see things from my point of view just for once. But in the end, my grandmother said, well, we should leave and let everybody calm down. My dad told my grandmother to talk some sense into me, and once I agreed to a church wedding, they would release the money that they've put away for me. I cried all the way out of the car, but my grandmother told me to pull myself together and call Max to meet us back at Auntie's house. I had no idea why, but my grandmother was adamant, and so I did just as that. And I drove my grandmother to my aunt's house. Once we got there, my aunt raised her eyebrows at my red, splotchy, tear-stained face and said, "They took it well, I see," and gave me a tight hug and, well, led me inside to wait for Max. When I sat down, my grandmother smiled and said, "Don't you worry, sweetie. We have a plan. Did you really think we were going to let you down?" I had no idea what she meant, but I was too upset to fully process what exactly was happening. I wasn't sure what I was the most upset about. The fact that I was unable to have the wedding I wanted due to me being denied wedding funds, or that my parents would not even come. I just felt so overwhelmed and upset, and all I had the energy to do was curl up on the sofa under a blanket and just wait for Max. Update number 2. I'm sorry I did not complete the full story last night. I drank too much wine and fell asleep. I was worried when I looked back this morning that there would be an update that made no sense, but I think the last one made most sense, My grandmother told me that she had a plan, and she was not kidding. She had come to my parents knowing that it was all going to get out of hand, and that I would need their support, but she also had been talking to my aunt about what would happen when I was inevitably denied any financial support by my parents. My grandmother is fairly well off, and in theory she could afford to help me out, but she agrees with me that it's unfair that Naomi was giving the wedding of her dreams, but I'm being denied mine just because of my religious views are different from theirs. My grandmother does not believe that love should be dependent on me bending to their way of life. Love is unconditional, and my grandmother is angry that my mom changed so much when she married my father and disowned her own sister. That saying, threatening to disown one of her daughters is a step too far for my grandmother. So between them, my grandmother and my aunt formed a backup plan, and I said to Max this morning that I would never get on the wrong side of my grandmother as she's so scary when she wants to be. So, without any further delay, here's the plan that my grandmother has decided to put in place for me. First things first, I'm going to call my dad this morning, and I'm going to be perfect, respectful, and repentant daughter, who will agree that my parents were right and I should respect them and have a proper wedding at the church, which will make sure that their friends see they have another dutiful daughter. I'll agree with the big white dress and the vows where I swear to obey my husband, and I'll agree to raise any children in faith. It's going to be a hard sell, as it'll be a struggle to make it believable, to be honest. My grandmother will speak to my dad and will offer to do the marriage prep with me to make sure I'm, quote, behaving and learning to be a good Christian wife. Well, she's also going to suggest that she supervises all my wedding shopping to make sure I'm sticking to the rules. My dad will agree to that as he knows I respect my grandmother more than my mom. I will agree to them inviting their church friends to the wedding and having a say on where we go on our honeymoon. Basically, I'm agreeing to be exactly like my sister, and if I do that, the money will be released and I can have a great wedding. When my grandmother was saying all this, I felt betrayed at first because she has always been the one person I could rely on, so I was confused. But I saw out of the corner of my eye my aunt and her partner laughing at the look on my face. My grandma took a drink of her wine before saying, "Of course, it'll all be a lie, and we'll be doing the opposite completely of whatever we tell your parents." I nearly choked on my drink, and Max was absolutely speechless next to me. The reason that my grandmother wants control of the planning and money is that we will not be getting married in the church. We will be arranging the marriage at the horse ranch where I want to get married. I'll be getting the dress that I want, and we'll be inviting the people we want there. I said that whilst I loved the idea of this, I was so happy she would do this for me. My parents would stop it in the tracks as soon as they realized what happened, and we've lied to them. But my grandmother said, hey, trust her. She would handle that side of things no problem. I asked why she was risking her relationship with my mother for me, and my mom is still her daughter. No matter how much my grandmother disagrees with how she's treating me, my grandmother leaned over and stroked my hair as she used to when I was a little girl. And I've been told off by my parents, and told me that she was tired of seeing how my mom had become a judgmental woman who decided who deserved to be loved and who didn't. She didn't raise my mom to be like that, and it broke her heart that my mom had disowned my aunt for loving another human, and was threatening me as well. My grandmother said it was time someone stood up to my parents, and this was the way of us to fight back, showing them that their version of God's love was not the right one. I cannot say this enough. I love my grandmother so much, and by the end of that statement, we were all crying like babies. Even Max, although he'll deny that until the end of times. That night, I truly felt for the first time that I was actually going to get the wedding of my dreams. And so we began to plan, and I left the details of how to hide it from my parents to my grandmother and my aunt. I'll be in charge of planning the actual wedding. I was still not sure we could pull it off, but hey, it's worth a try. So, the plan's obviously a development as we go. But that night, we put the basics in place, and I'm taking the risk of saying this online. Yeah, a bit of my parents don't do social media, and neither does my sister. In fact, they see the internet as a tool for leading godly people astray. So, I'm probably safe that they'll discover this. This is the plan we have, but whether it'll work will be a story for after the wedding. My grandmother and aunt are going to handle the invitations for everyone my mom once invited, and I'll do the ones for people I actually want there, which will be hand-delivered after the, quote, fake invitations go out. I'll need to talk to my close friends and make sure they keep the information themselves, that the venue is not the one on the official invitations. We will have to talk to the priest, but my grandmother's dealing with that. F.R. Edwards is a lovely old man. I'm pretty sure he has a crush on my grandmother. My grandmother says she thinks Edwards is also fed up with my dad for his small-minded view on religion. He has only been the priest of the church for 2 years, and he came from a more liberal parish. So, this is the plan. And we trick my parents into paying for the wedding of my dreams, whilst they think they're paying for the wedding of their dreams. Simple. I'm kidding, it's anything but simple. I'll not be able to update again until after the wedding, but I promise I'll let people know what happens one way or the other. At least, if I remember, the wedding is a year away. This could all go horribly wrong, but it'll be an adventure either way. Update number 3, almost exactly a year later. Well, I promised I would be back, and here I am, and I'm married. So you can see that a wedding took place, but which one, you ask yourself? I mean, you're probably not asking yourself, but it sounded good in my head. For over a year, I was living on the edge as we tried to plan a wedding that my parents didn't know about. There were a few times when I thought I've blown it all, and they would find out, but we managed to keep it to ourselves. After the planning meetings with my grandmother and aunt, I went meekly to my parents and apologized, saying I appreciate them, and that I should not be ungrateful, and I was prepared to have the church wedding for them. My grandmother came with me, so it looked as though she had talked some sense into me. As she predicted, my parents were happy to hand the finances over to her to control, as though my mom wanted her daughter to have the protection little perfect church wedding. She did not like me enough to actually help make it happen. My grandmother asked for a list of people to send invitations to, and we were ready to get started with our own planning. My grandmother went to talk to F.R. Edwards, and she assured me he was on board with the plan. He even offered to come to the real venue to marry me, which, I agreed to. In a petty way, it was another way to rub my parents' faces with the fact that I wanted to go my own way. So, I booked the horse ranch with the help of my boss, who understood what we were trying to do and has been amazing throughout this whole thing. We were so happy that everyone involved in the planning helped us keep it quiet, so there was no hint that we were plotting something diabolical. We booked a lovely venue in town for the after-wedding party, and that was the information we did not need to hide, as it was not something that my parents would disagree with, as it was very classy. I figured that they could join us there later if they felt like it. I knew there was no chance they would come to the wedding, and so I decided that I would not be telling them that the church was not the venue. The main reason for this is because in the year running up to my wedding, I had to put up with my snide comments about how I was not doing things right, that maybe there was hope for me and I would finally give up my, quote, man job and become a better lady and wife, and hints about children that I should conceive as soon as possible after, of course, I was married off. Max and I decided that we don't want children, so they're going to be disappointed again in that regard. My mom and sister came with me and I went dress shopping, as they hated most of the dresses that I liked, and they hated it even more that I invited my aunt as well. The dresses my mom liked were full-on princess dresses, which are not me at all. I wanted something simple, elegant, romantic. And in the end, my grandmother told my mom to stop. Let me pick a dress I loved, as I'd already agreed to a church wedding, and I had not wanted it in the first place. My sister sulked that she was not a bridesmaid and that her daughters would not be flower girls, but I decided not to have any bridesmaids to make the deception easier. I had not told anyone this, but I've spoken to my boss, and we were arranging for my favorite pony at the ranch to be my bridesmaid. It would be both adorable and absolutely hilarious. The invitations went out and we were ready to go. And I did feel a bit bad about my mom's friend who would turn up for a wedding that was not happening where they thought it was. My grandmother told me not to think about it as they were all bad as my parents were. I realized that if my dad was not there, I would have no one to walk me down the aisle, and so I asked my grandmother to do it. On the day of the wedding, I felt sick as I got ready to go, and I was so apprehensive, but the thought of marrying Max made me relax. I'm not going to go much into the detail of the actual wedding, except to say it was beautiful and everything I've ever wanted. The sun shone and I was surrounded by people who loved me and the animals who I've grown close to through work. It was perfect. The reception was not ideal to begin with, as when we arrived I was faced by furious parents who told me in great detail how humiliated they've turned up at the church and find it locked up, nobody there. How dare I betray them was screamed at me in front of everyone. The one thing that stopped my dad in his tracks was the sight of F.R. Edwards, as he walked into the room laughing alongside Grandma. The color drained from my dad's face when he realized that his own priest had sided with me. My mom was still yelling at me as she's not noticed, and F.R. Edwards walked over and looked my mom straight in the eyes. Well, and told her to stop making a scene. He also told my dad he would love to speak with him at work the following day. And then that amazing, loving old priest went in to enjoy my wedding reception. I have to say, for two older people, Edwards and Grandma can really dance. Maybe another wedding will be coming up, LOL. My parents and sister did not stay at the reception, nor did they congratulate Max or I. I wish I could say that surprised me, but it's just how they are. Their friends have not followed them here, so I did not have to deal with them. Max and I had a wonderful time, and the following day we left for our honeymoon in Italy. Whilst we were away, my grandmother shielded me from the fallout and forbade anyone from contacting me. It was only when we got home that I found out what happened afterwards. My parents had screamed and pestered my grandmother for days, which did not look good for them as she's elderly. She stood up to them, told them that she was sick of their behavior, and that they needed to look at themselves before they criticized anyone else. My parents sent me a letter saying that if I did not pay back the money that I've stolen from them, they would report me to the police and take me to court. Well, I was devastated, but my boss helped me with a lawyer who said they have no case against me. The big news is this. Edwards reported my father to the higher-ups in the church for his behavior towards me and my grandmother. Mainly, because of my grandmother, I think, as he definitely has a crush on her. He was reprimanded for his behavior and has been suspended from duty until further notice, which apparently is all my fault, and most definitely not his. My parents' friends were angry they turned up for a wedding that wasn't happening. But word got out, thanks to Grandma, and a lot of them turned against my parents. Max has always said I should cut contact with my parents, and so that is what I've done. Also, my relationship with my sister is dead in the water, but this is no loss, and we've never liked each other anyways. Despite all this, I'm happy. I have my wonderful husband, my amazing grandmother, and my aunt and her wife have adopted me as their own, which is brilliant. I'm even going back to church on occasion because, well, Edwards is making changes I want to see. Finally, I said I don't want children, but I have a baby. He's called Benji, and he's currently chewing on my curtains as I look at him. Yeah, he's a puppy. I have a puppy. Life is good, and sometimes we have to cut off the dead weight in our lives, even if it's our own family. My sister, she's a bit older, 28, has been spoiled rotten since when we were kids. Throughout my life, I resented my sister. It's awful, but it's the truth. You know when people say that parents don't have a favorite child, well, that's a lie. My parents had one, and it was my sister.
Everything in our home was meant for her, as the princess's birthright. Anniversaries, only about her. Presents, she would get them every year or holiday while I would not, and they always supported every decision she made, including not going to college, dating whomever she wanted and having kids. And why are things like this? Because my family was not rich. All they could scrounge would go to her. As a man, my father would often tell me to just swallow it and toughen up. It's my duty to allow her to be happy. This was the story of my life until I left home for college in another city. As college is free here, housing during college is also free. I could become independent of my parents and work part-time or assist teachers to make up any income I could to survive, food, etc. Today, I'm a project manager, and I'm still doing all these things to get by, as I prefer to be dependent on my parents. My sister got married many years ago and currently live in the same city in which I work. She has 6 kids, all under the age of 10, and they're quite spoiled children just like her. She's a single mother because her ex-husband left. Despite being in the same city, I rarely see my sister or parents because they've always ignored my existence. I've been pretty self-sufficient and successful, so they justify saying they have nothing to worry about when it comes to me. The problem is that she's constantly asking me to help her take care of them. Babysitting or taking them to the parks, etc. However, I don't have that much time, but this has never stopped her. She once got my class schedule online to make charts of when I should take care of the kids. I haven't seen it personally, but the last time I saw it, her apartment was pretty gross. From the hearing of what I'm hearing now, her floors are covered in dog crap, dirty laundry, dirty dishes, and trash. My sister is an ex-drug addict. She's admitted to using almost every kind of drug and is an ex-heroin addict. She said she's not using it currently, but I suspect otherwise. I don't know if she's fallen off the wagon and that's why her house is suddenly so much worse, but hey, I wouldn't be surprised. She got sober for the kids in probation, and she apparently has gotten rid of the dog. I have no idea where it is. Last I knew, she had a completely different dog. Regardless, at the start of June, the week of the 6th, I had an on-call responsibilities. And the 2 weeks before that were full of unhealthy amounts of coffee and sleepless nights. During that period, I was barely looking after myself. There was no way I could take care of 6 children. Even if I could, I would not do this. The issue is that my family, some of whom I've not spoken to in months, is coming out of the woodwork to tell me I need to take responsibility for her kids. But both parents are lazy, and my sister has not been able to keep a job for more than about 2 to 3 months and about 15 years. They all know my wife and I are childless, and on top of that, we're not financially or mentally able to care for a child, and definitely not 6. Regardless of our relationship also, it would be unfair to ask my wife to make this kind of sacrifice. We both agreed to have no children when we got married. To change something like that generally means a divorce. Everyone else in the family, or the ex-husband's family, is either unwilling to take them or is not in a position to take them. She said that if I did not take them, they'd go into the system, and it would break my sister's heart if she knew her kids were going to strangers instead of family. I've never wanted kids. I don't know anything about kids. I don't know the first thing about raising them. Now, I don't hate kids, have a phobia of them, or anything like that, but I do have severe anxiety around them. It's hard to tend to kids under the age of 10, and it often makes me panic when I'm hounded by them. I've watched all 6 of her kids in the past at once, despite my issues, but because of everything they needed and the pressure, I ended up having a panic attack that ended with me passing out. Beeb has pretty severe autism. Essentially nonverbal, not toilet-trained meltdowns, etc. It's the last bit that worries me most. As Beeb is not a small girl, she's 5'2" and 100 pounds. which is the size of some adults, and she's only 9, so she's still growing. I don't feel equipped to take care of this child at all, let alone with siblings. When I talked to Jessica, she started to get agitated with me and asked me why not. Apparently, my parents had a family meeting with my sister, excluding me, and decided that I should help her out. I reminded her about what happened the last time I watched her children and about my anxiety towards them. She began to get upset and told me, and I quote, "That happened a year ago. I don't even think you're scared of them. You just don't want to do it." I told her that 1, I'm not scared of them. I feel overwhelmed and anxious due to their needs and behavior. I should also mention that her kids are not the most well-behaved, which makes them even harder to control. This is where she started getting really upset, raised her voice at me even, and told me, and I quote, "Does it look like I have money for a babysitter? That's why I'm coming to you." I told her I was sorry, but the answer was no. I also told her if money was an issue, I could help her pay for the babysitter, and she just scoffed and told me to just forget it. She said that I'm obligated to take care of the kids because I'm her brother, and if I were in her position, she'd do the same thing, which I seriously doubt. She cried and called me awful, but it's my life, and ultimately I get to be selfish with it. Having a child is not an 18-year commitment, it is a lifelong commitment, and one I've decided not to take. She cheated with multiple different men and lost her ex-husband, and I don't think it's my job to swoop in and save her from the consequence of her own actions. I don't feel like I owe her anything. She left my home without even saying a word, despite my still trying to talk to her. Later that night, she wrote a lengthy Facebook about how, quote, family should always be there for one another, blah, 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 and how, quote, we should help each other despite our issues. My mom agrees with my sister and says I should have helped her. I didn't say no because I didn't want to help her. I said no because I knew I could not handle it. Other people disagree. Friends of hers whom I've never met have been reaching out to me and calling me at all hours to leave nasty voicemails. I'm saying I need to step up as a brother, but I just feel like she's trying to use me as her ticket out. I personally cannot stand her 2 boys because of how they treat me and everyone else so cruelly while pretending to be nice around my parents and my sister, both of whom are terror for the reasons below. Andrew, 10-year-old male, is a social bully. He's harsher to weird kids by making more honest comments about them and likes to point out differences. But he most likely is going to just belittle people regardless of this and seems to enjoy making people angry and cry. He also gets into trouble with a lot of his comments, and some of which border on criminality. But he's so good at hiding and explaining his behavior that he ends up getting away scot-free, or having very minor punishment. He's undoubtedly the favorite of her 2 sons. He was the result of my sister accidentally getting pregnant at around 18. When he found out that she was pregnant, he basically rejected his own son, left, and ghosted her immediately afterward. Fred, 9 years old, is more of a physical terror. You see, he's so emotionally unstable, which my family somehow excuses as temper tantrums, and just a physical threat in general. He's usually so angry and mostly screams at people whenever he gets mad at something. He even goes as far as to hurt other people and even animals too, mostly indirectly, either by throwing stuff in their general directions and sometimes at them, or by doing things like punching and kicking things around whenever he gets in a, quote, mood. My sister was severely traumatized by the whole thing with 10-year-old, and it was made even worse when she found out that she was pregnant with her 9-year-old during her senior prom. We never ended up finding out who the father was. Probably as a result of being pampered as a kid and later hurt in life, she was not good with her ex-husband either. He was the biological father of only 2 children but raised the other kid. He did everything for her, cooked, cleaned, took care of the kids' school, parenting, and hygiene, and took care of the kids in their home daycare. He had enough of her BS, though, and left her years after marrying her out of pity. He found another woman in the Philippines before leaving her. Things crumbled when his responsibility was shifted to her. There was an incident one day where her 7-year-old Barbara got mad at me because I would not let her jump on the couch. I explained to her that she could get hurt, and she threw an absolute tantrum at me. However, it was normal, I guess. It is what young kids do. Well, around the same time, my sister gets home and she starts suddenly bawling her eyes out and running towards her mother. I'm confused as she was just fine a second ago, but I followed behind her to greet her. She immediately starts on some sort of rant about how I had a man in the house and how neither she nor her sister had eaten all day. Jessica was so mad and started asking questions. I shook my head and said she was lying and that she had cameras, so we should probably sit down and watch them, and she said no, that I needed to go before she called the police. So I left. A few hours later, she calls me and apologizes, saying she watched the footage and saw no man enter the house at all, and that she had seen that her daughter had refused to eat the dinner that I made them. She asked when I could come by next, as she hoped I understood the misunderstanding, but I said I would no longer be babysitting for her. She said that Barbara was just 7 and that kids lie all the time, but I still refused. We went back and forth over the phone, insulting each other, and that was that. Our mother said that I'm being ridiculous for being mad at a kid, but it's more than that. I could have gotten in trouble if the police had shown up and she had said what she said. My family now thinks that I'm being too cruel because the boys are just children who need to, get people to love and guide them. My sister, in particular, is upset about this because she sees this as a potential abandonment from her and her boys. And she's trying to reason that, like us, the boys are also going through a mentally rough time. And abandoning them is going to cause them more mental harm. I called my mom and said I could not take them, and someone else in the family would have to step up or they'd have to go into the system. I've been accused of not caring if they end up being abused in foster care, and if they never get to see their family again, which I'm pretty sure is not how foster care works. My friends, to an extent, agree with my family, but also state that they understand why I would want some time off. So they have been very neutral about the whole thing. A couple days after that, my parents came to my apartment and dropped off the kids. They all ganged up on me, and my father used this as a quote, "you owe me" phrase so many times growing up to manipulate me into doing whatever he wanted. My mother told me I was incredibly selfish to not care at all about my niece and nephew, and only cared about myself and ignored my family. Well, I refused again, telling her I had never babysat before and I was looking forward to a quiet evening. First, she told me she was just leaving them there, and I told her I would call a child welfare committee and report her for abandonment if she pulled something like that. She begged and pleaded and actually began to fake cry. As I did not want to provide my neighbors with entertainment, I reluctantly agreed. I earn a decent salary in operations with a great company, and I had already requested a move to Australia, where the rest of my team works. From what I've heard and seen, they're pretty flexible about letting people move between offices within the US and abroad. One person transferred after only a year of working because they did not like the city of one of the offices was in. My transfer was approved, and they were in the midst of helping me apply for a visa and all that good stuff. In the time Jessica's kids were here, we had clear boundaries and rules, which the oldest son tried to break and argue over, but ultimately followed for the most part. He had 2 outbursts in the first 2 weeks he was here, to the point where restraints were absolutely necessary. At first, things were fine. The kids were a bit rambunctious, but still somewhat tolerable, and they ate their dinner without starting a food fight. And then I left them in the living room to watch a movie. I was in the study getting some work done, and I had brought my cat and dog in there with me because I wanted to keep them safe from the children. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash. I rushed to the living room and found the precious antique clock that I kept on the mantelpiece on the ground in pieces. I mean, it was worth well over $1,000. I was furious, of course, and asked how the hell this happened. The oldest kid incoherently explained that they had taken it down to look at it. Then the younger two were fighting over it and dropped it. Cue ear-shattering wailing from the other two, blaming one another for the demise of my prized possession. I had enough. Once things were ready for me, I dropped the kids off at their grandparents and flew for good. After settling in, I decided to call my parents to see if we could have a conversation together. Almost as soon as my mother picked up the line, she was fuming. Apparently, my sister has been talking to them about how, quote, awful of a brother and uncle I was, that I did not lift a finger to help out with their kids, going so far as to call me an ungrateful a-hole. Dad yelled at me to leave, and it was they who planted the idea in Jessica's head that their kids could be taken care of by someone else. And now they're tasting their own medicine. The kids are now at their grandparents'. I threw it back at them and said, "You had both me and my sister. You've got more parenting experience. You should take the kids if it means that much to you. I didn't have her. She's not my responsibility." This morning I received angry text messages and phone calls from several relatives, asking how I could be so heartless and how I could value a clock more than my nieces and nephews. I've told them I don't care what they think, because the way I see it, I was completely within my rights in kicking them out. They should just be grateful that I've decided not to make my sister pay for it. Judging from the fact that they have 6 kids, she probably can't afford it. This really left a sour taste in my mouth. I'm not close with my family and relatives, but I don't want them to hate me or something. I mean, I don't know. I don't want that to happen. And I definitely don't want my niece and nephew to end up in a crappy home. But I also don't want to be that person who reluctantly changes their entire life to raise kids and ends up being a totally useless and resentful parent. Moving here was a decision that I'm proud of. My wife has never been this happy before, but I don't really know if I behave too poorly or if I'm in the right. Many years of strange familial interactions will make you feel that way, and I'm so frustrated and upset that they expect me to clean up my sister's mess and threaten to disown me if I don't help. I don't think the kids should be with my family either, but they're in a far better place to take care of the kids than my wife and I ever will be. I'm not going to swoop in and clean up some other mess for her. No, not this time, and not for something that would ruin both mine and her kids' lives. I refuse. Update number 1. Hey guys, I've returned to Australia to finish some work that I left behind. My sister's best friend has been keeping me updated on what's happening. She has also been trying to clean up her house and has been driving 2 hours to bring my nieces to school so that my sister does not need to. I don't agree with this, though I'm glad that they're going to school. I told her friend that she needs to not bail her out because if she can't do these things without her, then we're not really helping her. I've been right where she is. She was basically me 6 months ago. My sister's been asking me for money for almost all her expenses now that I got a double promotion at my job. Essentially, I urged my sister to continue just to look into other things as well. Contact her social worker and utilize the resources that some of you have. I told her just about everything I could. My cousin is a licensed foster parent in our state, so in my opinions, well, there is no better place for the child. Plus, I get all the cute Snapchats from my cousin and her daughter with the baby. She's already a mother and has a large support system as well as experience with children that we don't have. The kids will be safe and cared for with our cousin, and I firmly believe that's the best place for them. My parents take issue with the cousin having the baby, and the reason is that my grandmother also lives with said cousin. And while no one can be bothered to visit, they just know that my cousin is taking advantage of our grandma. Spoiler alert! I live there. If anyone's being taken advantage of, it's my cousin. Lastly, I know some people are claiming I must be lying or leaving something out. To my knowledge, I'm not. And I'm comfortable with everything I've said as my side of the situation. I do have anxiety and believe that taking care of all 6 kids by herself is too much for her. I'm not pretending it isn't, and I'm also not pretending that she had no right to be mad at me. Update number 2. Hey guys, well, I just want to tell you, many months have passed. And surprise, surprise, my parents have done it again. That's right. I answered the door in the morning time, and the freaking kids were on my doorstep, and my mom was simply driving off. She just left them with me after making it clear multiple times. I called a friend who owns a small daycare, and she told me I could drop them off here. Thank goodness. I gave her my sister's contact information and told her to keep me updated, and I texted my sister about what happened, and I simply gave her the address and phone number, and I picked the kids up from daycare since my sister was not answering her phone and fed them. She picked them up at about 9 p.m. and was absolutely livid that I left them with a stranger. That it was irresponsible, that something could have happened, blah blah blah. I told her that she knew I could not take them in, and that she could have picked them up if she was not comfortable with that, since I texted the address to her. I thought this was a reasonable thing to do when someone leaves kids on your doorstep without a warning, and you can't take care of them. My mom told me my sister already has so much on her plate, and that I should just help out whenever I can. But I'm in no way leaving my life, which I have here in Australia. Then I ended up telling my parents something that I think got through to them, which was in the sense of, I love her, I care for her, but the point was made to my parents when I empathized that I'm worrying about me. I've lived with people who don't pull their weight, and as much as I sympathize with her inability to, I'm not in a position where I can take the responsibility on again. I also want to thank you for the support. It means a lot to me to know that I'm not wrong for saying no, and that I do have some like-minded people to chat with when crap like this comes up. Update number 3. Hey guys, I've posted here several times about how my toxic sister is, and it's clear to me that she doesn't want to change. I'm also starting to understand why most of the kids are the way they are. Every couple of months I go and visit, and her house is absolutely disgusting. I'm talking dirty diapers on the floor, laundry piled up everywhere, trash overflowing, moldy food sitting around. Yeah, well, the house is not one that a child could be surviving in. Along with that, there are no child barriers anywhere, and I constantly see her kids going through areas of the house that should be off limits. Along with all this, her child is noticeably underweight for their age group and is always wearing filthy clothing. The youngest child worries me more. He's 4. He doesn't speak, he's still in diapers, and they're making no effort to potty train him at all. Every time I go over there, his diaper is full of needs to be changed. Apparently, her car has no airbags, and she does not buckle her children into car seats. I tried to plead with her to prioritize fixing the car and buckling up the children, but my sister said the kids won't let her because they get uncomfortable. What? When I mentioned this to a close friend, they said their mother also did not buckle them in when they were little, and they got ejected from the car in an accident and still have chronic pain to this day. Her kids are failing multiple classes in school, and adding that to being home alone, I'm starting to be afraid for the well-being of these kids. Her 5-year-old son walked into another person's house just to get food. I learned all this from our cousin who still talks to her, and the father isn't really in the picture, and he can't take them in since she drove him away with all the tantrums. And now he's well settled with his current wife. My friends are telling me to mind my own business, but how am I supposed to mind my own business when the exact same thing that's happened to my friend could happen to my nieces or even worse? Also, if my sister gets pulled over, she'd probably get arrested anyways, so I'd only be speeding up the inevitable. The problem is mainly with her oldest daughter. Jessica's constantly putting her down and making her feel like crap, ignoring her when she's talking, making her watch her two younger brothers and leaving the kids alone in the house. I mean, she did this before in her old home, where she had roommates, but she just moved out into a pretty bad neighborhood. I mean, my dad lived there for years and I live 2 streets away. This is extremely concerning considering this area is very known for crime. Not only that, but she uses the oven, toasters, and such when alone. I've spoken to her about my concerns, yet she chooses to ignore them because, quote, children are messy. And quite frankly, no child wants to live in that environment. Update number 4. My family's always been Beeb's safe place. She knows all she has to do is call me. My mom got her a phone for when her mom would not wake up, feed her, or do all the basics for caring for a child. And I'll be there in no more than 5 minutes to get her, and she does call often. The last time she called me, she was hysterical, crying. Nobody would care for her. Mom would not get out of bed, her friend would not get off his game, and I finally had enough, so I picked her up, gathered as many clothes as I could find, 3 pair of jeans, 2 dirty shirts, and no shoes. And we left. I then found out she missed school because her mom would not get out of bed. Day 11 of the school year, and she's already missing for no good reason. Once we got home and we settled in a bit, I called the ex-husband and told him the kids were being neglected and something needed to be done. I then get a call from my sister's boyfriend, saying that he was calling the cops at my home because I'm holding my niece hostage. I told him to come get her. Many excuses and yelling matches later, I just hung up the phone. I know for a fact that at least half of my family will disown me if I do this, but I plan on calling Child Protective Services on her anyways. If she can't even throw a dang diaper in the trash, she really doesn't have the responsibility and fortitude to take care of a child. And that child would be better off out of her hands. It would probably be better if the report came from her husband if that's the route taken. Before inviting the government into my sister's and kid's life, though, from my side, I bought her baby gates, spent a day helping get her place cleaned up, and asked her if she was seeing a doctor. Offered to hire a sitter so that, well, she could get chores done or run errands. Taken her to get some new outfits for her and her children, and one thing I can't understand is why my parents can't help her. They're not that old, you know. Update number 5. So, me and my sister's ex-husband contacted CPS, we've had enough, and let them know everything I've heard. Well, the goal of CPS is not to take children. That's apparently a last resort when there's no other viable option left, and I was informed that the goal is to help the child remain with the custodial parent. So, CPS would help the mother find the resources needed while monitoring the situation. It's not true that CPS will seize children willy-nilly and shove them into a foster care system. They simply don't even have the resources. But abandoning your child on the doorstep of a family member and not even waiting to see if they're home is clearly endangering a child. Anyways, I will update you guys soon. They came to Jessica's home, explained why they came, did an interview with her and her kids, and checked her cabinets and fridge. Saw a stock of food, gave some information on food assistance in her area if she needed it, and checked the rest of the house. And they left. They come do an interview and based on the nature of the report inspect the house. They come back a couple more times randomly to make sure she was following their guidelines, of course. She also tried to trace it all the way back to me, but CPS understands that it's not me who should take care of Jessica's kids. So now my sister's forced to take care of her kids properly. CPS people mandated parenting classes, making an orderly home and life, counseling, anger management, and giving Jessica resources like numbers with associations to give single parents affordable childcare. A one-time housing cleaner to give the house a very deep clean, and a general life skills class. It's completely confidential who reports, but I feel fairly confident that they will know it's me. I provided some very specific details outlining their abuse that only I would know. My parents are more mad at me now for making sure that my sister has to fully take care of the children. They think that I'm, quote, pressuring the family instead of helping them. I feel like I made the right decision, but I can't bite back the feeling that my, quote, family situation is about to crumble beyond repair. But I can't help if this makes them mad. My family will see it as betrayal, but Jessica kids will see it as betrayal if I don't call. They will never be able to forgive the people in their family who saw them suffer as children and let it continue because they wanted to keep the favor of a crazy person. I also wonder if my parents would have been happy if the kids were relocated to strangers. They should be thankful that I did not call the cops instead of CPS. At this point in my life, I've decided to take a step back from the toxicity that is my family. They've set me back in so many ways without a second thought for me well-being, thus reinforcing my child-free stance. I will never have children, ever. Also, never again will I take on someone else's mistakes. I have my own life to live, and I cannot continue to let them guilt me into things. It's time my family dealt with their BS on their own. Anyways, I'm leaving for home this weekend. Thank you to everyone for your comments and suggestions. I am grateful. Let's say if you're going to be the kind of person who gets to have a baby just because you didn't like the first one, well, let me tell you. You don't deserve any baby in the first place. As simple as that. I mean, it's a thought I would have told my parents over 30 years ago when they had me. They would have skipped the experience and gone straight to my sister. So they would not have to leave a person with an existential and sentimental void like I am now. Sorry if I sound very adolescent, it's just that anger makes me write all this in tears. And all because of a couple of individuals suck in their role as parenting. My sister has always been the favorite, the number one, numero uno, the one who's always got the attention, who was supported in everything, the one, if she needed a sheet of paper for a student project, bought her a whole box of paper, while I, had to save my allowance to be able to buy a soda pop every now and then at school. There was no support in any way for me, not even when I asked them for a set of paints, which they promised to get me, and which surely, if they had given it to me, would have awakened the artist in me. But no. They only made me have books. And what they forced me to do is study. Tax law. Also known as the most boring career in the world. I warn you that this is a story of the oldest child being displaced by the youngest in every way possible and in a twisted way. I wished for many years that my parents would have another baby so that she would get displaced, the middle child treatment, right? But it did not happen. So I kept quiet for the rest of my life, and it was particularly difficult during adolescence, because of all this rebellious youth and other stereotypes. My parents and I argued quite a bit during that time, but it's because they generated those same discomforts. I remember one time when I got in trouble at school, and they spent almost an entire afternoon talking to the principal about my behavior, this and that, delving to the core of the problem, which happily was lack of attention at home. Thereupon, my parents, scolding me, apologized as well, and we went home. My treatment that good week went slightly better, which is as far as I can remember. But after the week was over, things went back to normal, and unfortunately for me, my sister was still the center of attention. I was relegated to the background per usual. If I had a little more money, believe me, I would have paid for some psychological therapy sessions. But I didn't. So, like any good person of this century, I bit my tongue and repressed all my feelings until college, where I met John. I'd always had the peculiar of dating big, strong, confident guys, but ultimately they ended up the same way, cheating on me and abandoning me, and any hint of fidelity they could generate in me. Add to that where I come from, and believe me, my head was not in a good place to live. John was different. He was short, skinny, nerdy, and a video game fanatic, and allergic to contact sports. Yeah, I sound cruel, but those were his words. At first, he didn't catch my attention, at all, and I even disliked him a bit, being that I was the one, of those people who would possibly bully him if I could get him on the street. Or not bullying, really, but just ignore him, generating the same conflict I had at home. But that was until I talked to him. He was tender, sympathetic, kind, gentleman. I still remember our, 5 first dates in detail, and it's because I finally felt like I was being treated the way I deserved to be treated, because someone was paying attention to me and making me see that I was enough or even too much for him. He used to say that he would never in his life expect someone like me to end up dating someone like him, because of all the stark differences, right? He was also honest with me and explained about his very difficult condition. He suffers from constant pain, mostly in the back area, and has scoliosis since childhood. This has been a fairly notorious limitation since he was born, and although physically he seems to be fine, he was telling me that at any moment he could require emergency surgery. He's since been rallying in case it does happen, and it was something that I thought was both smart and brave of him. He told me that from job to job, he managed to scrape together at the age of 12 almost $2,000 without ever spending on a popsicle or one of those sodas I craved in school. That's why I said this guy has my respect. And, things just happened. However, there was a lot of things involved for which I feel somewhat responsible. You see, when we finished college, which part-time job and a promising future, we decided to take our relationship to the next level. That's why we used some money to be able to go on trips to some cities, so we could enjoy ourselves as a formal couple. This period was quite nice because there were no fights and I could stay away from my parents' roof, so I could receive the attention that I was never given and even denied to me. However, this money I mentioned was part of John's operation money, but he didn't reveal it to me until a few days after our tour was over. Of course, there were some hiccups afterward, mostly from me telling him that he did not have to have done it, as I wasn't worth it, but when he dropped that ring at me and got down on that knee after a normal dinner we had that night, I could not say no to him. How could it be that even when I revealed the engagement to my parents, none of them seemed to pay proper attention? It was something along the lines of, that's nice. Congratulations, what's the dude's name? The guy I've been dating for 5 years. Instead, my sister, who was still in college, was being supported in everything, from student loans to the dorm itself, which my parents were paying for in spades. Even for a career like hotel management, and by the way, not that I'm going to discredit it or anything like that, but it's amazing the change that they have between my career and hers at the time we chose them. Mostly because it was imposed on me when she said that she wanted to travel the world, and that alone was enough to win over both our parents. Anyways, my sister had the upper hand, and she never missed a chance to rub it in our faces. Of course, she doesn't do it like she used to when we were kids. She was very snooty about her things, and I still remember one Christmas when she got the gift she wanted, but I didn't because I was, quote, too old for Santa. Even though she kept getting the same gifts until 2 years after she was my age by then. And she started to celebrate precisely the fact that she did get gifts and I didn't. She would rub my face in it, dance and make fun of them. And my parents? Well, she rubbed them in my face, danced and teased me and my parents as well. Well, they were too busy caroling with my drunken uncles in the kitchen. Yes, they have been my life up until then, but I dare say none of it mattered to me. Not of what I just told you have ever gotten bad enough to say off-color things. In itself, I took it for years as bad behavior on part of my parents, but I devalued my situation by saying that many people have gone through a similar or even worse situation. But now I see that this is not so. And it is then that I tell the details of what makes my story particularly horrible. Years ago, my parents went through a rather delicate economic situation because of all the, sometimes somewhat exaggerated excessive spending by my sister. they ended up almost completely in debt to the neighbor's dog. And that's when John and I came along. I know what they'll say, why help your parents when all they have given you is a life full of neglect? But understand that I have a little chicken heart, and they are my parents. Besides, all their friends, when I talked to them, would just tell me to help them because they felt so bad asking me for money when they were aware of my situation with them. In that sense, I thought at some point they were going to apologize for the years and terrible parenting that they gave me. But you know what? Nothing of that sort. So, I gave them some money and they were able to get themselves completely out of debt. But beyond that, it was a thank you, darling. That felt more like it was my blood obligation to support them and look out for them. That felt very bad to me, but now I feel worse about another situation. As I told you, John spent some of the money from his emergency surgeries on our trip and our wedding. And although we managed to recover some of it, in the end it wasn't enough to make ends meet. I asked my parents to help me because I knew from that ugly experience that they've been saving up. I told them, no, I begged them, that it was for my husband, the person I loved the most, but they made 1,001 excuses until I finally got discouraged and started asking for loans like crazy. The surgery was one of the most expensive things since it was bone marrow transplant, which is only surpassed by emergency lung or heart transplants. You don't know how helpless I was when I woke up one day. John next to me in bed crying, saying he couldn't move, much less get up. I was in panic and despair and seeing my parents' unconcerned faces when I would ask for help and they would say, "I'm sorry, honey, we don't have it," or "We're saving up for something else." It was too much for me to take. I wanted to disengage from them and disappear from the planet, and I had to borrow heavily from friends and even campaign on the internet to do it. In the end, we reached the goal and the operation could be done. It was quite a delicate process, but seeing the satisfaction on John's face, the man who only cared about giving me the life I didn't think I deserved, was too much for my heart. My parents and, of course, sister were there during rehab, and while John kept telling me to change my face, the truth is I wasn't the most exciting person in the room when they came here, let alone when I found out what happened. That is the real reason why they couldn't help. As it turns out, there was something more important after all. To buy my sister a damn house. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, and a modest backyard, and of course 2 bathrooms equipped and with the possibility of a basement. Do you know what my wedding present was? A kitchen mixer. And by the way, I already have a better one. I think it was the biggest slap of reality I've ever had in my life, and when I found out a month after John's surgery, he had to hide the phone and car keys from me because I was so angry with them. I would have told my parents anything morally wrong, from wishing them dead to wishing I've never been their daughter, and I even had a huge upset stomach as a result of it. I mean, they don't have money for their son-in-law, but they do have money to give a super fancy house to their youngest daughter. Guys, you'll excuse me, but this goes beyond jealousy. This is almost grounds for a moral lawsuit. I'll speak to you straight and give you round numbers. John's surgery, $140,000. And the house they gave my sister is valued at almost $200,000. A few things could have happened. Either they could have given her an apartment or something noticeably more comfortable, or they could have loaned us the money and then we could have paid them back. They haven't written to me, and neither has my sister. The most surreal part of the whole thing is that they gave that house to the daughter to graduate 2 years after she was supposed to finish her degree. Because my sister was enough of an idiot to repeat 2 whole years at university. And guys, that is not cheap. I'll admit those were the economic problems they faced, my sister's imbecility, and now they reward her with that. It's super unfair. Update number 1. I'm sorry, guys. I got carried away with my previous post, and I don't know, I felt that if I kept writing, I would get to the part where I would start saying obscenities. Although many like it, I have to remain serene because I know I'm not that. Anyways, I got upset too because they didn't have a valid excuse for not helping. Giving my sister a house was perhaps the biggest slap in the face I've ever gotten in life. John remains too calm, although I've slowly tried to bring him to the point where this is me. Of course, he didn't have to go through the same thing I did because he still had more considerate family. He was an only child, but he grew up with several cousins, and he tells me that it wasn't a problem. Everyone treated everyone the same, always with respect and affection in between, and I can only envy him tremendously. Anyways, I've not spoken to my parents since, but I know how I feel, and they know it. My sister keeps bragging about her new house online, even though my husband was on the verge of death just a few weeks ago. It's perhaps a new definition for the word selfish. In itself, it was nothing necessary for her, but now she had a clear path for any drone to approach her like flies to honey. A pretty girl, single, recently graduated, and a tremendous house? By God, what she's going to do is feast on men in her home. For that's another aspect of her, that she's never known how to say no to a man. I could spend a lifetime saying all the things that I detest and that are objectively wrong with my sister, but I feel that words would not be enough. Anyways, I came here to vent and to let you see that no matter how selfish you think your parents are, you will know that someone, somewhere in the world, there's a girl with even worse parents. I think I mentioned it, but it killed me to see John on the surgery table with the mask and the blank stare, and I felt like I was going to say goodbye forever to the person who has loved and supported me in the most in my whole life. So it's very delicate in the state in which it's in, because it is such an immense rage that it makes the desire for hatred well up on me again. Previously, I've commented on how I used to not get angry with them for the simple fact of being my parents, but I think they broke that privilege, because there's times when even your family have to say no to. Those were some bitter conversations I remember having in high school with my guidance counselors, and they would say the typical, "You should love your parents no matter what because they gave you life, and sacrifice part of theirs to give you a comfortable upbringing." And while I never lacked food on the table, okay, maybe that's true, I never lacked it, there are times when even that doesn't matter if the rest of your upbringing is going to be absolutely horrible. Updates number 2. It's bad to laugh at other people's frustrations and misfortunes, but on this occasion I would be surprised not to. As I found out, no. You know what? I'll explain it. My parents texted me and they took advantage of the fact that I was very busy. They knew that I wasn't going to pay 100% attention to them, and from what I gleaned from the conversation, I learned that my parents did not buy the house outright, but offered a down payment to secure the house at about 50%, with my sister proposing to pay part of the loan that they made in a certain amount of time. In other words, it was going to be a joint purchase, but she needed to come up with a 50% of my parents' loan. That made me feel kinda good. I mean, just a little. Not that much, because it made me believe that at least my sister was able to pitch in so she could have her own house, although that doesn't take away from how selfish they were with us at the time. I also understand why, in part, they could not help us, and it's because they didn't have the money. I'm not going to put so many alibis for what they did, because they didn't even engage in explaining their situation to us. They just went full-on pandering to my sister and everything she wanted. But guys, that is not the craziest part of it. I forgot to mention something, but it's been about 3 months since my last update, which was when my sister got the house, and my sister has not paid her share of the home at all. She had a really good job, but ended up spending what she had on a fancy new car just to match her fancy new house. Stupid, I know. But what can you expect from her? I'm not surprised by somehow my parents are, who are just starting to see her for who she is, a spoiled brat who doesn't know how to manage her own life. Anyways, the thing is, they contacted me because it turns out that the lost daughter they always had on the side is living a pretty comfortable life. After all, a certain me and a certain husband in the last few months started a company that took off absolutely exorbitantly from one moment to the next. We invested in one of the foreign clients' orders and we hit the jackpot with it. That and the fact that we decided to bet on some emerging businesses from some friends and they skyrocketed like you don't have an idea. What's more, we went from trying to find money for operations to paying back loans with interest. And that's another update I was going to share with you. John and I have improved in our lives lately. It's funny about all that because I even got to thinking that it was part of the divine heavenly karma that caused us to have so many ugly moments before we could have our resurgence. Just to give you an idea. With just my part of the salary alone, it was enough to get out of debt. And we were saving to be able to buy a new car, but given the circumstances, we want to take a risk and go for a home. Of course, we'll be keeping the car we have for a long time, but we prefer the house because, depending on the place, it would be even more efficient for transportation. Currently, I'd say the only negative aspect of the routine is to take the bus from time to time as not to put too much strain on the car. But it's all for the sake of saving money. We even set a goal of having our first child as soon as we had 3 things. A house, a car, and of course a trip to Europe. After that, welcome pregnancy baby belly. Gosh, I do get sidetracked from the story. Anyways, my parents called me to ask me for money. That's right, they got to the point where, with their hands well and truly washed, they ended up coming to me so they could help pay for my sister's house. Of course, I did not give them an immediate answer, as I told them I'm busy. And well, I was in the middle of a very important meeting, and I was answering them all the time, yes, yes, no, whatever, no, yes. Then I read the issue, and it dawned upon me. So I was able to secretly laugh at their situation, but no, that's not how things work. It's not like you could have offended me or denied your help in the past and then come to me in the most normal way asking for help. No! Gentlemen, that's not how life works. And if you think there's nothing wrong with that, I recommend you stop reading from now on, because you may not like what's coming. I haven't spoken to my sister at all times, but I know my parents haven't scolded her properly, and that gets on my nerves. If so, her behavior will simply be worse, and it'll be all her fault. Update number 3. I did something wrong. Or good, not bad, but fair, I guess. Depends on the point of view you take, but to tell you a little more, let's go back to a month when my parents had the nerve to ask me to finish paying for my sister's house, after she spent her money on a new car. I refused at their faces flat out, and it was going to be my revenge for everything that they've done to me all my life. But something happened, and the gears of a diabolical plan, I thought, began to turn. First, I had to talk to them again sometime later, calling a small family meeting where I exposed everything, and I mean everything. John wanted to be with me on the occasion, but he was at work, busy with a super important meeting, and I arrived at my sister's house. First time I had seen it from the inside since all I had seen were pictures online. My parents were there, and they were all half crestfallen because they knew that they had been very hypocritical with me. When I was about to start talking, my sister all at once jumped up and said, Look, we know what you're going to say, that we're terrible people and all that. Can we skip it? I just feel like it's over the top. Well, I have to thank her for saying this because then I was able to go on to the next part much easier. I start saying that even so, they should understand that it was all wrong and that they would now be paying for the broken dishes, or rather they would not have to, since I took out a piece of paper and put it on the table. Oh, it was nothing, just a small document that said John and I were the owners of the property we were talking about. I had to explain it to them as they didn't quite understand. When I told them that thanks to the contacts with the seller who sold them the house, I was able to do something. Apparently she was well aware of the situation, and I don't know about how for more than 3 months the house payment was still due, when at least half the down payment had been promised, and when she realized that my sister had a new car and the purchase had not been finalized, she was able to take legal action. Of course, that was before I arrived, coincidentally. The bank put both the house and my sister's car up for auction Since she wasn't able to afford them, something my sister was very well of and did not tell my parents, the seller showed me pictures of the place, and I told her that even though she was my sister, I had not gone to visit her. The truth is that the place was very nice. So, I offered her up 75% of the total payments in advance, with the possibility of paying the rest next month, because that was why, she would trust that the same thing that happened to my other side of the family would not happen again. And I have news for you, today is the end of that month. So officially the house and the car is ours. That's right. You know what they call that? 2 birds, 1 stone. At first my sister gets very upset and refused to take her things out of there, as she said that this was her new home. But I told her in the most coldest voice in the world that the contract on the table said otherwise, and that she better leave before I take legal action. I never felt better in my life. And here we are, in a new house with a new car, but we're thinking of selling this car and having 2 more family focuses. After all, we're already considering going further with this family project. Regarding my family situation, well, since my sister ended up moving in with my parents and sold her car to get out of various expenses, neither of them seemed to apologize to me for everything. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. And my sister hates my guts for everything that happened. I know, it wasn't right, but you pay for things one way or the other, and I'm just thrilled about our new home. Although we had it deep cleaned very well, because the previous tenants, let's say, were not all that neat. My mom tried to apologize via video call, but then started asking me for money and some consideration, to which I told her the whole situation was earned by them for the kind of people that they were. If they loved my sister so much, then keep supporting her, for surely they can get other loans so they can, get their next house. Meanwhile, John and I are still in our new abode, decorating and able to ride our bikes to work, but we had better not get used to it, as we are soon going to have a new truck that will allow us to get in and out and explore the world much better. Oddly enough, I'm thinking of a cheaper car than the other one my sister had, but much more practical. Well, that's always been me, the one who sees much further ahead. Maybe my family would have understood if they paid more attention to me. Anyways, sorry. Hello, how are you guys? I wanted to reach out to everyone on this platform because my head is in a huge mess right now and I really need to vent. It's been a while since I let myself vent in front of anyone, and I don't want to let anyone in my real life know that this is bothering me, so I thought I'd share it here with everyone. The reason I can't share this with anyone that's a family matter, and my family has always been picture perfect. I mean, we don't really fight that much with each other, and everyone thinks that we have a perfect relationship, even if they know that we aren't super close and the way that we don't share our secrets with each other. But we do care about each other. My family includes my brother, me, and both parents. I'm the younger one, and my older brother is 5 years older than me. He's been married for 6 years and has 2 daughters. They're twins. My brother and I have always been very close because my parents were never home. So we had to rely on each other for everything that we wanted. We were close as kids and we still live close now, and if not even more. I treat his daughter like my own and they treat me like their own as well. Anyways, because we're so close now, my brother, Sam, and I can discuss a lot of family things with each other, especially those regarding our parents. Our parents had always been somewhat more dramatic in every sense of the word, that they never really paid much attention to us. They just did whatever they wanted to do without telling us or even regarding us in that matter. A really big example of that is that my parents have been very suspicious these days. They were acting very weird, talking in hushed voices near us, and they didn't even tell us that they were spending so much money. Listen, I know that it's their money and they can do whatever they please with it, so I should not interfere that much, but seriously, man, it's getting out of hand. They keep selling every single thing they own, and when we ask them where they're spending the money, they just tell us to mind our own business and not to interrupt their conversation. My brother and I even tried to set up an interrogation with them, so we would find out where they were spending thousands of dollars, but it was to no avail. I have a sneaking suspicion that it's on a gambling debt, but my brother keeps telling me that Dad has always been super against gambling, so it's not likely that, and that's where they're spending the money. I still think it is gambling because there's no way they need so much money for something simpler. Either that or they're doing something illegal and dangerous. Either way, it's getting really out of hand because now they've started selling really big stuff that has a lot of significance to us, or the amounts to a lot of money. The biggest thing is that they sold us their house. Yeah, you read that right. My parents have lived in that house for 3 decades, and my brother and I grew up in that house, so we had a lot of memories attached to it, which is why we didn't want them to sell it. However, they did not even let us know that they were selling the house. Instead, one day they just decided to text us that the house has been sold and it would be finalized in a few days. When we asked where the money would go to, they didn't give us a proper reply. And when we were still ready, we're going to live there, they just told us that they were going to live in my brother's spare house. Yeah, you see, my brother has an extra house because his wife's parents gave it to her before they passed away, as they added it in their will. By then, my brother and his family were already living in the house, so they didn't want to shift all over again. That's why they've left the house empty and we're planning on using it as a rental house to get some extra money. What really shocked us about the entire situation was that my parents did not even ask my brother if they could move in. They just texted that they were going to shift in 2 weeks and asked my brother if the house was clean or not. When we expressed her concern about them not asking my brother or even informing him about it before selling the house, they were very shocked that we would even think of something like that, and told us that because they were our parents and we lived in a house that they paid for our entire lives, we should be doing the same to them without any questions asked. Anyways, my brother is a big softie by heart, so he didn't dare to tell them that they could not stay, so he let them. They've been living in that house for almost 3 months now without paying any rent or any bills, and this has added a lot of burden onto my brother's shoulders because now he has to pay bills for 2 houses, and even has to take care of his family's expenses, including both of his daughters who are still very young and need a lot of things. I'm doing pretty well financially, so I offered to help my brother pay for the bills of the house that our parents lived in because I saw him really stressed out due to money matters. I told him that I could take care of the bills of the house and that he should just focus on his family instead. I live alone, so I don't have a lot of expenses, whereas I know he has a lot. And, well, he didn't take my offer and told me not to worry about him because he could take care of himself. I think that the reason he did not take my offer was because he thinks of himself as the big brother, who needs to take care of everything, as me, the younger brother, needs protection. I love him, but I know that he babysits me way too much to take my offer. Anyways, after that we decided that we would not interfere in our parents' business because it never ended well for us, and we wanted our mental state to be stable. However, we could not keep ignoring it when things got bad recently. Let me tell you guys what happened. Basically, my parents have decided that they needed more money, and because they've already sold every single thing that they own and are both retired, they don't have money to spend whenever they want to spend it. That's why they've resorted to asking both of us for money, and thinking that we would just give it to them. Now, if it was a small sum of money, then I would not be minding and I would just give it to them, because they are my parents, and I can give them a little cash if they need it. Even if they don't tell us why they needed it, but the amount of money that they asked for 2 weeks ago, it's just insane in my opinion. They asked me to give them $200,000 in less than a week, and when I asked what they needed that for, they get really upset and told me that they've reminded us to stop asking this, and the fact that we're still asking them is straight up disrespect and very ungrateful, and that they would kick me out if I did not leave them alone about the money. This didn't really scare me because they had sold every single thing that was in the will, so there's nothing left anyways. Besides, how's it ungrateful? Because, $200,000, that's a lot of money they're just asking for, and they're not even telling us what they're using it for. It just feels like we're just wasting our money at this point. Even if they asked us to give them $1,000 or so, we would have given it to them, no questions asked, but this was a lot of money. I'm already very convinced that they're using it for gambling, so there's no way I'm giving them this kind of money. If you think about it, this is a ridiculous amount of money to ask for even when you're gambling it. I mean, why do you even do this kind of money, and how do you not win? My brother is still convinced that they're not gambling, but they might be doing something worse with the way that they're acting about it. Anyways, I decided to tell them that I did not have that kind of money, so I would not be able to give it to them. But they get really upset and tell me to take a loan out on my credit card if I have to. But they need the money as soon as I can give it to them. Obviously, I said no to the loan because there's no way I was putting myself through that just because my parents had no sense of responsibility and I didn't want to spend their money wisely. This resulted in a very big argument between us where they called me ungrateful and told me that this was not how I should be treating them because I was their child and they had taken care of me my entire life, so there's no way I should even be thinking about not helping them. The weirdest part about the situation was that every single time I mentioned them not telling us where the money was going, they seemed to step back like someone slapped them in the face. It happened for a split second, but it was observable, if you know how confident and secure in themselves they usually are. That's why my suspicion about the entire thing just increased, because if they were reacting this way about something, then it means it's no good, and they're just doing something harmful, either to themselves or to others. When I kept saying no to them, they started to get even more aggravated and told me that this was not the end, and that they would make sure that I gave them the money that they needed before they just stormed out and slammed the door behind them. They slammed it so hard that the frames I hung next to the door actually rattled with the force, and I kept myself flinched as I heard the loud bam of the door echo in the house. I thought I'd inform my brother about the situation, but I had to do something urgently, so it left my mind pretty quickly. Even though I kept thinking about the situation, the thought of informing him did not cross my mind that often, so I didn't mention anything to him. However, my parents did not stop bothering me after that, and I thought that their ego was super big, so they would not contact me again. But, of course, I told them no, right to their face, but it seemed like they had no shame, and they still don't. They kept calling me, and just telling me to take a loan out every single minute, or at least it felt like every minute. Every time I opened my phone, there was a new message or a new voicemail left behind telling me to give them money or take out a loan from the bank. At one point, they started to emotionally blackmail me by telling me that they were lonely and sad, and the way they used this money brought them joy, which I was stealing from them by not giving them the money that they needed. All of their whining and nagging was honestly getting really annoying, and there was nothing more that I wanted to do than to tell them that I wasn't going to give them any money, so they could just walk their little butts out of my life and not bug me. But even if I bullied my brother for being a softie to not cutting my parents out completely, I'm the same as him, so I could not block them. However, they kept bugging me even when I was at work, and it was getting really overwhelming, putting in the mental energy to keep ignoring them every day. So, the next day I was on a call with my older brother, and we were discussing things that had apparently recently happened, so I decided to offhandedly mention that our parents keep asking me for money. So much money, and they would not tell me that you were going to use it for something, and you know what I heard the next minute? I found out that they asked my older brother for the same thing, and they went to his house and demanded that he pays them $20,000, which they need that week. We were both very shocked that our parents had gone to both of us for money. At first I thought that it was because I said no, so that's why they went to my brother. Sort of as a last resort, but turns out that they had texted the both of us on the same day. Even though they did not visit our house on the same day, they did send my brother a text about it in the morning, right before they came to my house. We checked the time and everything, and we concluded that they must have sent him a message as well, because they probably knew that they were both going to say no. So they wanted a backup option. Apparently, they kept bothering both of us constantly by texting and calling, and demanding that we give them money. What makes me wonder is, what if one of us said yes? Would they still take the money from the other? Knowing my parents, I'm pretty sure that they would, and either way, none of us were ready to give them the money that they wanted, because I had taken a loan if I wanted to give them the money, and my brother was an entire family along with 2 little daughters who need support financially. So, there's no way that he was going to be able to afford giving them the money as well. This just meant that our parents got really mad at us and refused to back down while annoying us to the core about the entire situation. Nevertheless, both my brother and I agreed that we would not give them any money until they actually told us that, well, they were using it for, because it's very suspicious that they keep taking money and selling things to gain money, and then using it somewhere no one knows about. Update number 1. So things have been going a little bit wild ever since the last time I updated the story, but let me tell you guys exactly what happened. So basically, my brother and I thought, and it was indeed very stupid of us, but we still thought that we could just be able to ignore our parents and pretend like the whole thing never happened so that they would leave us alone and not pester us anymore. However, it actually backfired on us because they got even more annoying as time went by, and it got to the point where we are actually physically not being able to ignore them because they would randomly show up at our house and demand money. So, what happened was that we thought that it was over and they finally got in their right mind and left us alone. What I did not know was that they've been bothering my brother about it again and he had not mentioned it to me yet. I thought everything was okay and nice, but it wasn't because they were still pestering him about giving the money and supporting them about it. I'll tell you how I found out. I parked in front of my brother Sam's house hoping to spend the evening catching up with family. Little did I know that what was happening behind the front door would ruin any hopes I had of a peaceful reunion. Before I could even enter the apartment, I heard muffled voices, which were slowly and very obviously growing into a heated argument. When I knocked on the door, it's abruptly swinging open, revealing a tense atmosphere inside. Sam stood in the middle of the living room with his face a mix of frustration, desperation, as he kept trying to defend himself again and again by telling them that he did not have the money to give to them. I walked into the room and my being there almost broke the tense environment of the room. But obviously nothing could stop my parents, so they just raised their eyebrows in a silent greeting towards me, and they continued the conversation. I could see a silent plea in Sam's eyes asking for support and a decision that went against his soft side, and did not let him do anything against the family when he looked at me. Like I said, he was a big softie, so this was probably making him feel worse about saying no to the both of them, especially because their expressions were full of anger and disappointment. As I took in the silent tension, the room grew smaller, and Sam's annoyance was very noticeable, while my parents, desperate for money, had an expression of anger that just would not drift away. At this point, the expression was making me angry because they did not even have the right to act this way towards us in the first place. It was a scene I'd seen far too many times before I knew it needed to stop. That's exactly why I took a deep breath and took a step forward, choosing to stand with my brother in this situation because, quite frankly, we needed all the support that we could get. For some reason, I've always felt obligated to break the cycle of financial dependence that my parents have thrown onto us, just so that my parents could keep bugging us about the situation. I needed them to be gone, and that would only happen if they realized that we would not give them any money. I tried to stand with them, and both of us expressed our discomfort of being used as an ATM machine whenever they wanted cash, but they would not listen to us at all. Instead, they started to blackmail us emotionally, and telling us that it's our responsibility to give them money because they paid a lot of money for our school and other expenses when we were kids, so we need to pay them back. It was ridiculous hearing it, honestly. It's wild to think that my parents are demanding money from us, being kids and having basic necessities that every single kid needs. Besides, it's not like they gave us anything else in our lives except money. They were never present and weren't even a tiny bit emotionally connected to us. They just came to us whenever they needed us to do something, and they expected that we would do it for them just because they were paying for every other thing in our life. When we told them this, you could actually see the shock slowly coming off to their face, and before turning into anger and straight-up resentment. They kept complaining about how we were so disrespectful and had no heart because we weren't even helping our parents when we were in need. so we had no right to speak about them being present. We had too much of their drama by then, so we told them to go away and not return because they didn't have a space in the family anymore if they were just treating us like an ATM machine. They left, but they told us that they'd be back very soon because we owed them money. Update number 2, so they did not take the hint and they came back. It was supposed to be a simple evening, a break from the daily grind as I arrived at my brother Sam's house. The mood was light at first, with a sense of bonding present as we shared stories and laughed. Little did I know that the peace of the evening was about to be shattered by the unexpected arrival of our parents. I felt a familiar tension grip as the air and the figures loomed in the doorway. It wasn't the first time they dropped by unannounced looking for financial aid. Sam and I learned to brace ourselves for these unwelcome visits because of our shared history of their constant request for money, but it was still very nerve-wracking. For a moment, we decided not to open the door for them, but we knew that they would not leave even if we tried to ignore their existence, so we had no choice but to open the door for them. When they entered, they saw me sitting there and just rolled their eyes at me like I was insolent little brat that they just couldn't bother with, but they still regarded both of us when they asked for money again. They asked me if I got in touch with the bank about the loan, and I said no. And when I said that, they got really upset before they turned to Sam and asked him if he arranged the money. Again, he said no, and they get angrier. Sam and I seem to have an unspoken understanding. We both have refused to continue the cycle of providing money to our parents whenever, they just ran into difficulty. The refusal, however, did not affect them. Their demands were stubborn, encouraged by desperation and a false sense of entitlement. Sam took a decisive step forward as the tension in the room grew, and it was genuinely a turning point in our family's history. Before, we had never gone against my parents in this manner, or at least he had not. His words were like a slap to my parents' face, and we could see that on their faces. It was a choice that would force our parents to face the consequences of their inability to work, and the reality that they don't have money to spend carelessly without even letting anyone know what they're spending it on. The proposal was simple but effective. Pay rent for the house that they were living in, which belonged to Sam's wife, or we kicked them out. I know Sam, and she would never have ever had the heart to do this to our parents before, so just the fact that he was willing to take this step showed how much our parents had hurt him with all their financial drama and emotional blackmail. It was risky of a move, but Sam's determination, yet bitter gaze kept on our parents, challenging them to accept the reality of the situation. Obviously, because our parents are jerks, they did not accept the fact that they had to pay the rent, and they actually laughed in Sam's face when he proposed the idea. That just made it even angrier because they were outright disrespecting him at this point. But before I could make any sharp move towards them, Sam held my gaze and told me not to create a scene because they did not deserve me wasting so much mental energy. I was slowly getting really angry at them because at that point they had started to throw out insults towards us so they could hurt us. It was very obvious that their technique was to hurt us enough that we would just hand them the money, give it to them. Though it didn't really make sense to me because it was doing the opposite of making us want to give them money. Anyways, after an hour of Sam telling them to pay rent and them refusing, they finally left when Sam told them that they would call the police. Also, it was the fact that they were forced to threaten them in this way because not only were they not leaving us alone, but they actually broke a few frames sitting on the living room table just because they were angry at us. Not only that, they started yelling insults about Sam's wife and daughter at this point. Obviously, none of them would handle anything like that, and those three did nothing to our parents, and the stuff they were saying was really horrendous. I could see the fire raging in Sam's eyes when he was threatening to call the cops on them. Honestly, if he wasn't such a nice and genuine person, I have a very strong feeling that both my parents would be leaving his house sporting a black eye. I'm not sure if they're going to pay rent or not, but hopefully this gets resolved soon because the stress is taking a toll on the both of us. Update number 3. The air was thick in Sam's house, which had been once a warm, inviting place, but now just full of tension. Rent had been paid or risk being kicked out. That was the deal that we had set with our parents the last time they came over and created a whole fuss about us being bad children. But as the weeks went by, our parents' resistance seemed to go against the financial boundaries Sam had set. There was a strained attempt at routine for the first month. As always, our parents' obedient son, Sam, reminded them of the rent that had been agreed upon, but these words were not heard, and it was unclear why they were so casually dismissive, ignored, or even purposefully avoiding us, when they were the ones who had always put such an emphasis on money and always collected what was due. It showed hypocrisy, in my opinion, because when they had given the money, they just chose to ignore us. Sam became impatient as the second month went by. Our parents kept living under the roof without making a single contribution. Even after the reminders become harsh warnings, their apparent lack of humanity was evident, and it was very obvious that they weren't going to do anything about the situation. This month, Sam has been deciding that enough was enough, and that he didn't want to keep having to beg my parents for rent when it was legally under his wife's name. The house did not even belong to them, so it's very unclear why they were being so arrogant about the situation. As the days went by, the situation kept getting worse, and I told him that it's getting enough, that he did not need to keep begging them about this and let the issue just get bigger and bigger. I told him that he needed to take matters into his own hands, so he got really determined and decided with an unwavering resolve that he was going to change the locks on the door, and not let them enter the house until they decided to sign a contract stating that they would pay rent. It was a clear message to both of my parents, as we were not going to handle any more crap from them because their area of financial dependency was over, and we weren't going to keep an ATM on us for them after they've given us so much crap over it. The next morning, after the locks were changed, our parents went outside the house and their faces were painted with shock and disbelief. We saw this through the Ring camera that we installed in the house way before they even moved in. Anyways, they called Sam while I was still at the house and told him that he needed to replace the locks with the old ones right this instant, because they were the parents, and he did not have the right to treat them like outsiders, because Sam apparently owned them a lot. Again, they kept going on with the fact that they had to pay our childhood fees when, they were the ones responsible for it as parents. As children, we did not ask to be born, so it's not our responsibility, and we should not have to have this conversation at all. Anyways, after that, they decide to call the cops on us and tell them that they were locked out of the house by their child, and that they were not given any notice about the situation. However, they literally have no legal right to the property, and they were just not paying bills. We showed the police the bills that my brother's name was on, and we showed them the property papers that my brother had and my brother's wife's name was on it. So technically, we could have them thrown in jail because they were trespassing. That's exactly what my brother told the cops, and told him that he would like to press trespassing charges, but they told us that they could not do anything about it because it was a civil dispute, and it could only be settled in court. When my parents heard that, they thought that they won if they took the matters to court, so they've been threatening to sue us ever since, and it's been so annoying. Final update. So, as the weeks went by, things were relatively peaceful, and it's been about a week since the eviction. Since we had basically locked our parents out of the house which had fights constantly happening was now very quiet, and it was a little unsettling. But we were very grateful that our parents were out of the equation now, because we could not handle them demanding money from us anymore. However, our parents would obviously not let us stay in peace, so they resurfaced with intense desperation that was clearly shown onto their faces. They returned after a week of us locking them out, and according to them, they'd spent 2 days in some cheap hotels that had rat infestations and bad rooms that did not accommodate them well. And they spent the rest of the week in an old home shelter that finally took them in. When we saw them, we did feel a bit bad that they had to go through so much because of us, but technically when you think about it, it's their own fault that this even happened because they were being careless. Careless about their money, and they're trying to ruin our lives because of it. Sam and I had this unspoken understanding that our lives were no longer bound by the cycle of financial dependency, and that we would not let them have that kind of control over us ever again. As the saying goes, old habits die hard, and that's exactly what happened with my parents. When they knocked on our door, they had this kind of desperation look in their face that really highlighted every single wrinkle on their face. It was a very different contrast to the parents everyone once knew because they were always so confident in themselves, but now they were begging for forgiveness and recounting all the hardships that they went through during their uncomfortable nights at a budget hotel and the reality of having to live in a shelter. Well, they were even ready to tell us the reason that they were using up so much money. That's how the desperation started. That's how desperate they were. At first, we did not want to hear anything they had to say because we just wanted to cut them out of our lives. But then Sam's wife told us that we should at least hear them out to see what they were bothering us for so long. Turns out they actually did gamble all the money away. And then because they didn't have money left, they took a loan which they weren't able to pay back. That's why they were asking us for money all the time, because they had to pay off the loan, and also, they just kept gambling since it's become an addiction, and they weren't willing to let loose of it. But even then, we could not take them in because even while doing that, they were playing their emotional tricks on us and telling us that we should pity them as their parents because they did so much for us that this was something very little that they were asking for. Or they started insulting us or our family, which was very uncalled for. If they had just told us what was going on, then maybe we could have helped them, but because they put us through so much, we refused to help them and told them that they need to sort it out on their own. Then they started shedding these crocodile tears, which I knew very well were fake, because I've seen them shed these in my entire life, whenever something bad happened and they had to get sympathy. Anyways, we told them that we would get them in an old age home, but that was the most that we could do because we did not want any more contact with them. So that's what we did, and our lives have become so much more peaceful. I never thought I would ever write here, but I guess there's a first time for everything. I'm writing this with a heavy heart and a bit of joy because I am no longer in this situation. I just want to hear and get everyone's opinions and comments because I don't know whether I should feel guilty or not. This is going to be a lengthy read, but trust me, it's worth it. I'm pretty sure that all people with toxic parents will relate so much of this situation with mine. Let me give you guys some context first, so that you don't get lost and confused. I'm a female, 24. I was 23 years old when all this went down. I've always had a close relationship with my grandfather. He was truly my best friend and my everything. He was my superhero and role model, and for some odd reason, my close relationship with my grandfather always annoyed and bothered my parents, which I found weird because they would always use me to get money from him. Not to get into that much. Too many details about my grandfather was a successful businessman, though. He'd built an empire for himself, so he lived quite a luxurious life, but he always remained humble and selfless. So, because of my grandfather's wealth, my parents, especially my mother, always felt entitled to his money. They would make any type of excuse just so that my grandfather would send them money, which they would use on alcohol and expensive vacations, which they never took me on. It was always about them, and I was always their last priority in thought. I never had that homey, loving childhood. I was always jealous of other kids who had a loving and caring parent. Eventually, my grandfather got tired of sending my parents money. He told them that it was time for them to work hard to create their own wealth, so he cut them off. They were furious that they've been even begging me to try to change my grandfather's mind. I refused and told them that my grandfather was doing the right thing and that it was about time that they stopped relying on him financially, especially because they both had jobs. Their jobs weren't high-paying, but they were better than nothing. Instead of hearing me out and trying to understand where I was coming from, my parents kicked me out. They told me that it was about time that I moved out and found a job. So, I found hilarious though because I was 16 and still in school, but they had no care in the world. Unfortunately, my grandfather could not take me in because he was always out of the country on business trips. Luckily, my cousin Kate from my father's side was able to take me in. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. I could not believe what was happening, and I was just grateful that I had Kate and my grandfather. My parents never even contacted me once after they kicked me out. It felt like I've been disowned and cut off by them. They would never check up on me or even send me a text message on my birthday. Kate and my grandfather tried their absolute best to fill that void I was missing, and eventually I got over the hurt and moved on. I was busy cleaning up around my apartment. The apartment was a gift from my grandfather. It was a graduation gift because I've graduated top of my class. While I was packing up the dishes, I received a call from an unknown number. I first ignored it, thinking that maybe somebody had dialed the wrong number, but it kept on ringing. I answered, and I was shocked to hear the voice on the other line. It was my mother. She greeted me and I greeted her back, and she told me that it's been a very long time, and she apologizes for only getting in touch with me now. I was speechless and completely caught off guard. I asked her why she was contacting me after all these years. She heavily sighed and proceeded to ask if we could please meet up so that she and my father could explain everything in person. Well, I was a bit hesitant at first because, these were the people who had abandoned me at 16 years old. It was my grandfather who's been financially taking care of me and helping Kate out. But I'd miss my parents, and I thought that there would be no harm in agreeing to have a little sit-down with them. I told my mother that we could meet up, and she told me that she would text me the details. After we hung up the phone call, I immediately received a text from her, and I started to wonder where they had gotten my number from because I knew that my grandfather or Kate would have never given my number up. However, I still asked them to just make sure that it wasn't them, and they were both shocked to hear that my mother had reached out to me. But as I had predicted, they were not the ones who have given my mom my number. I start to think about what could my parents possibly want to talk to me about. It was finally the day of the meetup. We had to, agree to meet up at this little cafe. I was the first to arrive, but I didn't have to wait for long. My parents walked, and they both had huge smiles on their faces. I stood up to greet them, and my mom immediately ran up to hug me. I was taken back because I'd always known that my mother was not the affectionate type. My father then shook my hand and told me that I've grown so much. I refused the urge to roll my eyes, because obviously I'd grown up, and I was 23 years old, not 16. A waiter took our order, and there was an awkward silence between us. I was just staring at them, wondering what they could possibly want from me. My mother then coughed and looked straight into my eyes. She first apologized, and she was apologizing for kicking me out at only 16 years of age. She continued to tell me that it was a huge mistake on their end, and it was the worst decision that they have ever made. Well, I frowned a bit and then proceeded to ask them, why did they never check up on me then, or contact me at all? So, my father takes a deep breath and tells me that they did not know how to approach the situation because they already knew that they had wronged me. He told me that they thought that I would not want to see them or hear from them. My mother then added that she had once called Kate to try to check up on me, but Kate straight up told her that I had no interest in talking to her or my father. So I raised my eyebrow. Why had Kate never told me that my mother had once contacted her, and why would she tell her that I had no interest in talking to her when she knew how much I missed my parents? I decided that I would talk to Kate about it because I believed what my mom was saying. She had absolutely no reason to lie to me at this point, and my mother then began to explain that things got really rough financially after grandfather decided to stop sending them money. She continued to explain that their jobs were paying them peanuts and that they were struggling to get by. So I asked her, why would they waste money on alcohol if things were that bad? And she took a deep breath and told me that they were using alcohol to numb the pain and stress that they were feeling. It was all starting to make sense now. So, my father explains that they had no choice but to kick me out because they could not financially take care of me anymore. My mother added that she knew that if they kicked me out, my grandfather would obviously finance and give money to provide for me because I was his favorite, and that's exactly what they wanted. For him to financially provide for me since they could not. My mother then told me that she wished that she could have told me all these years ago, but she was scared that my grandfather would stop financially providing for me. Everything made sense now, and I was a bit relieved. I was glad that I had agreed to meet up with my parents because I finally gotten to the bottom of the truth about why they kicked me out and never contacted me. I told them that I appreciate them for reaching out because all these past years I thought that they hated me, hence why they kicked me out, and never bothered to check up on me or contact me. My mother frantically shook her head and told me that they loved me and that I was their entire world. They just did not know how they were going to provide for me. I told them that I completely understand it. My parents then asked if we could work on rekindling and fixing our relationship because that was all they wanted. So I told them that I would love to work on our relationship. They smiled at me and we continued having our lunch, which went very, very well. I honestly enjoyed myself. I'd miss my parents so much. Update number 1. Hey guys. A few weeks have passed since my lunch date with my parents and things have been going very, very well between us, I'll say. We text almost daily. My cousin Nani had decided to visit me and we were chilling outside by the patio sipping on some wine when she brought up my meetup with my parents. She asked how everything went and I told her everything. I could just feel my face glowing with joy because this was something I had always wanted. Nani raised her eyebrow and sighed. Well, I asked her what's wrong. She told me that she did not want to be negative or try to bust my happy bubble, and I looked at her with a confused facial expression and asked her to be honest. She took a deep breath and told me that I was being too frustrating and trusting, and that I should not be rushing into things with my parents. So I asked her, why not? She told me that these were the exact people who kicked me out at 16 with nothing. She also reminded me that my parents had not contacted me for almost 7 years, and now all of a sudden out of the blue they want to rekindle and fix things, huh? She told me that this was all very, very suspicious. I told her that she was being judgmental, and that everybody deserved a second chance, you know. She shook her head. She just asked me to please be careful around my parents, so I rolled my eyes and went to the kitchen to get a refill. I could not understand why my cousin was being so negative, especially because she knew how much I'd always wanted to reconnect with my parents. My grandfather and Kate had said the same thing. They were also very suspicious. Reappearing in my life like this, they told me not to trust it. But I told myself that I'm an adult here, you know, and I could make my own choices and decisions. I believed that my parents were being genuine. A few days passed and I received a call from my mother. She was asking if I could arrange a dinner date with Grandpa. She told me that she and my father wanted to make amends with him before they had heard that he was getting ratherly sick. Well, this was true. My grandfather has been dealing with a few health scares. I'd say nothing too serious, though. I was so warmed by this and extremely proud of my parents. They really have changed for the better. So, I called my grandfather and tried to arrange the dinner. At first he was very reluctant and told me that he had absolutely nothing to say to them and that it's too late for them to make amends, until I reminded him that my mother was his only daughter and that he would end up being regretful. My grandfather had 3 sons and my mother was his only daughter. However, he and my mother had never had a close relationship like he and I do. After I said that, he agreed to go to the dinner. When I told Mother that my grandfather had agreed, she was extremely happy. She told me that I was the best daughter in the whole world and that she loved me so much. My heart started oozing with love and joy, and this was what I had always wanted. My mother hardly ever told me that she loved me while growing up, so hearing her utter those words now, it warmed my heart. My family was finally coming together, and this was honestly making me so happy. It was the night of the dinner. Me and my parents had agreed to go to my grandfather's place together. They were dazzled by my apartment and kept on asking me questions about my finances. I told them that my grandfather had bought me this apartment as a gift for graduating and that I was now working at a small interior design company. My mother slightly frowned when I mentioned that my grandfather had bought me this apartment, but I decided to just ignore it. We arrived at my grandfather's house and they were surprised by how big his house was. I then remembered it's been 7 years since they last saw him, and in those 7 years he's built this gigantic mansion. We were greeted by his partner, Catherine. I could tell that Mom was very uncomfortable, but she put on this fake smile and tried her best to entertain her. Catherine was friendly and warm, My grandfather, on the other hand, was a bit hard-headed and standoffish. At first, dinner was very awkward, but then things warmed up and my grandfather started laughing and joking with my parents. It was a beautiful sight to see. Honestly, it warmed my heart. My parents apologized to my grandfather for taking advantage of him, and then they thanked him for taking care of me. My mother even told him that she and my father had better paying jobs now, and that they've been able to provide for themselves all these past years. My grandfather told her that he was proud of both of them and that all he had wanted for us to be financially independent and responsible. They then eventually all agreed that they would work on their relationship. I was so happy with how dinner had gone. I felt in my heart that this was the beginning of a new beautiful start. Everyone had been so negative at first, but my parents proved everybody wrong. They really had changed and they were fixing their wrongs. Update number 2. Hey guys, a few months have passed since my parents came back into my life, and things have been on and off. After the dinner with my grandfather, the communication with my parents became less and less. When I mentioned this to my grandfather, he told me that my parents were checking up on him on a daily basis and that they would visit him and Catherine every weekend. I found this strange, so I decided to go visit Kate since it's been a while since I last saw her. She was so happy to see me. We start catching up on each other's lives, and she asked how things with my parents were going. I deeply sighed. I told her that things were weird because they hardly spoke to me anymore. Kate raised her eyebrow and asked me what has been going on. Well, I told her that the last I saw them was when we had dinner at Grandpa's house, and ever since then our communication has almost been non-existent. Kate just shook her head and told me that Catherine had told me that my parents were back to asking my grandfather for money. I asked her, with a shocked facial expression. I shook my head, and I tell her that's impossible. Kate told me that my parents have even moved closer to where my grandfather stays. I could not believe what I was hearing. Why would they move and not even tell me? Something's not adding up. Kate told me that I need to be careful around my parents and that they could not be trusted. So I told her that maybe there was an explanation for all of this, and Katie raised her eyebrow and told me not to be naive or gullible. I had no idea what was going on, but I was going to give my parents the benefit of the doubt. There was no way that they could be back to their old ways. My phone rang and I answered it. It was Catherine. She was frantically crying and I asked what's wrong, and she responded by telling me that my grandfather's been rushed to the hospital. I started panicking and Kate asked me what was wrong. As soon as I tried to explain what was happening, I started breaking down in tears, and Kate immediately held me and starts to rub my back. She tells me that everything will be okay and that I need to calm down so that she could help. I calmed down for a few minutes and explained to her that my grandfather's been rushed to the hospital. She tells me that I was in no state to drive and that she would take me there. We rushed to the hospital and found Catherine already there. So I asked what's going on. And then she tells me that grandfather's been feeling unwell for the last couple of weeks. I ask her if the doctor had said anything, and she tells me that she was still waiting on his reply. I asked Catherine if she called and informed my parents. She told me that she had, and they've been saying that they were on their way. Kate shook her head and muttered something under her breath. My grandfather's doctor arrived and he told us that he has no idea what's going on with my grandfather, but he assures us that my grandfather will be okay and that they were running some tests. So, a few minutes pass and in come my parents. They ignored us and immediately went to the doctor and asked him if grandfather was dead. The doctor raised his eyebrow and asked, who are you guys? My mother looked annoyed and told him that she was his patient's daughter, which Catherine confirmed. The doctor told my parents the same thing that he told us. They looked rather disappointed once the doctor left. So I greeted them and they completely ignored me. I tried greeting them again and they continued to ignore me. Kate raised up her voice and told them that I'm speaking to them. My mom rolls her eyes and gives me a lousy hello, while father remained silent. Guys, I'm so confused at this point and I'm hurt. I was asking myself what the hell's going on. because these weren't the people I've met up for lunch a couple months ago. These were the people who had kicked me out at 16. After a few minutes, my parents got up and left without even saying goodbye to anyone. Catherine could see the hurt in my eyes and hugged me. She told me not to give them that much power over me, and Kate, however, was fuming with anger and wanted to go give my parents a piece of her mind, but I asked her not to. All I wanted right now was for my grandfather to be okay. After spending a few hours at the hospital, my grandfather's doctor informed me that my grandfather wanted me to go see him alone. Well, I was confused by this request, but followed the doctor to his room. My grandfather looked awful, but he had a smile upon his face which made me happy. The doctor then closed the door and everything felt so serious. The doctor starts to explain that my grandfather's test results came back. He told me my grandfather has been drugged and that his body was now reacting to it because it was a very dangerous interaction drug. I looked at both my grandfather and the doctor confused and said, "Drugged? Who could have possibly drugged my grandpa at his old age?" My grandfather asked me to sit down, and I did exactly that. He held my hand and looked directly into my eyes. What he uttered next took me completely off guard. He told me that he believed that it was my parents who had done this. Well, I asked him what made him think that. He told me that my parents have been nagging him for months to leave his entire estate to them. He continued to explain that he and Catherine had caught them multiple times stealing money from him. My heart was obviously starting to shatter into pieces. I could not believe what my grandfather was saying. I was in absolute shock. He continued to tell me that once he refused to give them money, my parents got angry and aggressive towards him, that they had even threatened him. I was shocked and fuming with anger, and my parents had not changed at all. They were still the greedy, selfish pigs that they always have been. My grandfather's doctor told me that grandfather has been battling cancer for the past 2 years. It looks like it's gotten worse. I looked at my grandfather because I had no idea he had cancer. Tears started to roll down my face, and I asked him why hadn't he told me. He admitted that he didn't want anyone to feel sorry for him or to pity him. He wanted to live his last days stress-free and surrounded by genuine family. He also confessed that he knew if his cancer status became public, my parents would have appeared in my life in an attempt to get into his good books so that they would be put into his will. I just kissed his forehead and told him that I completely understand why he had decided to keep his illness a secret. He asked me to not tell anyone about the cancer. He explained that he had already written every important person in his life a letter. He also asked me to wait until after his death to confront my parents. His doctor also mentioned that if my parents had indeed attempted to drug my grandfather, then they could face serious criminal consequences. So I nodded my head, and I promised Grandpa that I would not confront my parents at all, and I promised to myself that I would make sure that my parents would be punished and that they would not get away with this. Update number 3. A few months later, my grandfather peacefully passed away in his sleep. It was a bittersweet moment because I knew that he was no longer in pain or suffering, but on the other hand, I missed him so much. His funeral was beautiful. His funeral was memorable. He was a very well-respected man, and everybody always admired his humble. My parents did not bother showing up for his funeral, which broke my heart, but it also made me even more determined to get my revenge. It was the day of my grandfather's will hearing. Me, Catherine, and my uncles were all waiting in the attorney's office when my mother walked in. I asked her what the hell she was doing here. She smirked and told me that one of her brothers had called her to inform her about the will hearing. She also reminded me that she was my grandfather's daughter. Catherine rubbed my back and told me to calm down and to not let my mother get to me. My mother then told me that I should be showing her more respect because after this hearing I would be begging her to let me keep my fancy apartment. One of my uncles asked her why she was so sure that she would be getting anything. She smiled and said that fate was on her side. My grandfather's attorney called us in. We were all seated around his table. He first gave everyone their envelopes, and I assumed that these were the letters my grandfather had told me about at the hospital. My mother told the attorney to speed things up because she had a house viewing in 2 hours, and I rolled my eyes at her. The attorney read the will, and the will stated that my grandfather's whole estate would be inherited by me, that I was the sole inheritor and sole heir of the beneficiary to his estate. She slammed her fist on the attorney's desk and asked to see the will. She read the will and told the attorney that it's fake. The attorney shook his head and told her that this was my grandfather's latest will. My mother took out a document from her bag and showed it to the attorney. She told him that she had a copy of the will her father had asked her to sign. The attorney looked over it and told her that the will was fake and obviously outdated because the signature was clearly phony. He then looked over to me and told me that everything would be transferred into my account and that it would take a couple of months. My mother glared at me and told me that there's no way in hell that I would be getting my hands on her hard-earned money. She was fuming with anger, and she started walking towards me as if she was going to attack me. Catherine stood in front of me and told my mother to sit down. My mom exploded with anger. She confessed that the only reason she even contacted me was so that she could gain access to my grandpa. My heart shattered into a million pieces when she said those words. My mom kept on screaming that I've always been a burden to her and that she hated me. The attorney told my mother that if she did not calm down, he would have no choice but to call security. My mom ignored his warning and started screaming about how I ruined her plan, how I've ruined everything for her, and out of a psychotic anger, she admitted that she had drugged my grandfather so that he could sign the fake will she and my father created. Everybody gasped in shock. My mom immediately tried to backtrack her confession, but it's too late. The attorney called security and they rushed in. While they were escorting her out, she kept throwing insults at me. She called me every evil word in the dictionary, and I was just shocked that she actually admitted to drugging my grandfather. I was disgusted. I cannot. She was even my mom. She's so evil. She and my father had done all this, all because of money. How could anyone be so selfish and greedy? I was more disgusted than hurt, and I was glad that she had admitted such in front of everyone, so they could see her for the demonic snake that she is. Final update. Hey guys, it's been 6 months since the day of the will hearing and things went chaotic. I inherited everything. I was shocked by this, but Catherine told me that this was exactly what grandfather wanted. I asked her why wasn't she upset or angry that she didn't receive anything. She told me that she was genuine with grandfather because she loved him, and that she had her own money. It was heartwarming to know that my grandfather has been truly loved till his final breath. So, my uncle told me that they had always known that I was my grandfather's favorite and that they never bothered them because they knew how evil and unloving my mom was. I bet you all want to know what happened with my parents, though. Well, they're set to go to trial in a few months. That's right. See, after my mom admitted that she had drugged my grandfather, the attorney reported it to the police and gave them the camera footage. To avoid jail time or even receive a less of a jail sentence, my father confessed and admitted everything to the police. Turns out my parents were struggling and were close to being homeless. So that's when they decided to contact me so they could gain access to my grandpa. Once they saw that my grandfather's become even more wealthy, they planned to drug him so that he could sign the fake will, and, they drafted it up, which stated that everything would go to them. After he signed the will, my parents had planned on slowly poisoning my grandfather so that he would eventually die. Such wicked, evil behavior. I was shocked when I heard my father confess, and I was just glad that they were going to get nothing, not a cent from my grandfather's estate. My grandfather's attorney informed me that it looked like they would be locked up for a very long time, which sounds like the perfect revenge plan for me. Sometimes you don't have to personally commit the act of revenge. Sometimes the universe and the law do it for you.